Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started. What if fate swapped the gum-gum fruit for something far more dangerous? Instead of rubber, Luffy consumes a series of mythical Zoan devil fruits, each one carrying the power of a tailed beast from another world. From Ichi to Ju, every transformation brings new chaos, new strength, and new problems for the seas. As Luffy sails the Grand Line with powers that rival legends, the world struggles to decide whether he's a future pirate king or a walking natural disaster, a high-energy crossover full of parody, absurd strength, and straw hat madness. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Ten-Tailed Straw Hat by Shark Teeth. Respect to author.
Chapter 24, All the King's Men and All Dried Up. Luffy was breathing hard as he stared around him, trying to get a heads up to where Ace would attack from next. They had begun a game of cat and mouse through the middle forest for the last hour, both of them attacking and dodging. So far, neither of them had been able to make a real heavy blow against the other. Ace often gained the upper hand, but Luffy was able to dodge Ace's moves more easily than his big brother had. Finally, by the time that his brother had disappeared, Luffy looked around to see that he had somehow found himself in the Grey Terminal. Standing up on Trash Mountain, gritting his teeth, he glared around for his brother. "Ace," he yelled out, "I know you're there." Suddenly, in his mind's eye, he saw a burst of fire flying at him from above, and at the last second he moved just as Ace appeared overhead and shot another fire fist at him. As quick as always, Ace laughed as he landed on the mound of burning garbage and Luffy jumping to the next one, yards away. "That was dirty," Luffy called back, but he was smirking, as he wiped his mouth, his heart pounding fast. Ace merely shrugged. All's fair in love and war, little brother. In the world of pirates, there's no such thing as unfair. He noticed that Luffy was breathing hard before he laughed a little. "Come on, is that all you got?" Ace taunted good-naturedly. "You scared of losing?" "Not this time," Luffy cried out as he jumped and the two tried to punch each other at the same time. The moment that their fists clashed against the other, the force behind these punches were so great that anyone else could have felt the shockwave as they were both thrown backwards. Luffy twisted in midair as he landed on a ship's broken mast and moved out of the way as more fire shots came flying at him. As he laughed and jumped around, he couldn't help but remember about a year after Ace had left home and he had gotten a shock in the newspaper. Flashback. Makino, Luffy called out as he went running through the village and straight to her bar, clutching a sheet of paper in his hands, and his face practically glowing with pride. Makino, who had been cleaning some glasses behind the bar, looked up in surprise to see him there but smiled brightly at him. "Luffy, how are you doing? What's going on?" she asked as he bounded over to her. "Look," he cried proudly as he held up the paper. "It came in the newspaper today." "Luffy," she said smiling, "you never read the paper." "Yeah, I know. But look," Luffy cried, showing her the paper. "A wanted poster. Check it out. It's Ace." Makino looked at it to see the familiar words, "Wanted, dead or alive," was written underneath with a familiar picture of a young man who was about 18 or 19. He was grinning wildly under his shock of messy black hair, and the splash of freckles across his cheeks. His signature orange hat on his head with his full name printed underneath it. "Ace did it," Luffy told her, beaming, "he's officially a real wanted pirate." Makino laughed. "You know, most people wouldn't think that their older brother being a wanted criminal would be a good thing. But it's great," Luffy cried out. "He's amazing. Ace is just amazing." "Yes, I agree," Makino said, coming out from behind the bar. "You know what we should do? Why don't we hang it on the wall?" "Really?" Luffy asked excitedly. "Well, it'd get ruined if we just left it here," she said as she found a nice spot on the wall and hung it proudly and smoothed it out gently after it had been manhandled by Luffy. "I'll get a frame for it later. But now we can look at it any time we want to." "Yeah, that's great," Luffy said excitedly before he had an idea. "Hey, Makino." She asked as she stood back to admire it. "I'm gonna leave this island in 2 more years," he said firmly. "And I'm gonna be a pirate too. And then I'm gonna get a bounty. When I do, will you put it up here too?" Makino laughed as she looked back at him. "I promise," she said. "And when I get it in the paper, I'll hang it right next to your brother's." "Really?" Luffy gasped, his eyes shining. "You promise?" "Promise," she smiled, and to prove that her words were true, she took hold of his pinky with her own. End of flashback. Did she now? Ace laughed when Luffy told him about that particular memory. "Good old Makino. I'm sure that she must have been real happy for you when you got your first bounty." "Yeah," Luffy agreed, "I want to visit her again someday and see it." Ace beamed before Luffy's feet were coated over with hockey and swung out of the way as Ace, pointing the index and middle fingers of both hands him like guns, suddenly he began to shoot bullets made of fire from them. After dodging them, Luffy jumped up high. "Gum gum, Gatling, And like that he began to kick down hard, which caused Ace to hold his hands up and created a flame mirror to block it. Ace, Luffy called, suddenly remembering something. What did you mean before? When you said that I gave you a reason to live. Ace just smiled. Idiot, don't you get it? He called back. First of all, I want you to know that it wasn't your fault. What happened to me that day was my own. Because I let that bastard admiral get to me, I almost ended up costing us both our lives. But I don't blame you. Luffy yelled as he went back into second gear and jumped forward, Ace dodging and punching him in the back and knocking him straight through a concrete slab. I mean, Luffy gasped out as he jumped out of the debris unharmed. If it were me and he was insulting Shanks, I'd probably have gone back. That doesn't matter. Ace yelled as Luffy dealt a hard punch in the face. The point is, instead of running to freedom with you, I stayed and wanted to fight someone I had no chance of beating. I let my anger take over and I put you at risk as much as myself. I was cocky and look at what happened. After everything you went through for me, I went and threw it all away. Luffy gritted his teeth angrily as he fought back the wave of emotion at the memory. Tears were now burning in his eyes, tears that he tried to hide. But Ace still saw them as his own eyes softened. The two stopped fighting for a moment as they jumped up high enough to land on the towering wall that separated the Great Terminal and Edge Town. You still blame yourself for that, don't you? Ace asked softly. There was some uncomfortable silence for a moment. I was weak, Luffy admitted softly, staring at his brother. I was so weak, I couldn't move. I just sat there frozen. If I was stronger. Ace sighed, a stab of annoyance on his face. Weak. My little brother is calling himself weak. Give me a freaking break. I admit that you weren't ready for a stage like Marineford just yet, but what you did was far from weak. I couldn't move. Luffy yelled angrily at him. You ended up saving me again. Luffy suddenly felt a deep sense of shame for what happened. If he had only enough energy, he could have easily have dodged that attack and they both would have escaped alive. He almost drowned hundreds of times since he was a little kid. Ace had always been there to pull him out of the sea, and here, he ended up dying because he just couldn't move just like he was in the sea. Ace just looked at him as Luffy dug his nails into his palms tightly as the memories bombarded his mind's eyes. The phantom pain he felt when he felt his body being torn apart from the inside as he fought of the poison in those 20 hours, the bleeding wounds he got from the battlefield and the exhaustion of his wounded body, all the pain and injuries he suffered during those days. But all of that paled in comparison to his heart being torn to shreds of seeing his brother use the last of his life to protect him. I didn't ask you to, Luffy whispered. Ace's face held no emotion as he looked at his little brother. No, he agreed. You didn't. But I didn't ask you to save me either. I didn't think, I just acted. I didn't think about what would happen to me, the whole time I thought of only protecting my little brother. And I don't have any other regrets. I told you that I would live my life proudly and I wouldn't change anything I did. But why? Luffy asked, suddenly growing angry at Ace. Why? Why did you fight Blackbeard? He said that you fought him to protect me. Who asked you to do something so stupid? Why did you want to save me so damn much? Ace just looked at him. You're my little brother, that's why, he answered simply. But those words seemed to make Luffy even angrier as he charged at him, his fist turning black as he charged ahead. And maybe, Ace added softly to himself as he jumped forward to attack as well, I always knew that you were the stronger of the two of us. Because, you could have still gone on living if I had died. Straw Hats. The Straw Hats were all standing on the hill, almost in stunned disbelief at what they were seeing. Two graves stood there, surrounded on all sides by rusted swords and a large bouquet of flowers lying between them. The larger of the two bore the name, Edward Newgate. A large coat that would have fit a man of giant proportions and an enormous bisinto that no normal human could ever have lifted, were made into a grave marker, and a tattered pirate flag that bore the mark of the Whitebeard pirates hung there. But their attention was drawn to the smaller grave next to it. It bore Ace's name, as well as his trademark hat, necklace, and knife as the grave markers. Both graves were frayed with age as they stepped forward as if in a daze. What? Ace's grave? Nami gasped shocked, her hands covering her mouth, unable to think of anything else to say. Luffy Sand's brother. Brook whispered as they all ran towards it, just to make sure that it wasn't a dream. No way. How is this here? Chopper cried, switching to his walk point so that he could move faster. I remember hearing about it, Robin said hurriedly, and they all looked to her. I remember reading about it in the paper. Apparently, it was red-haired Shanks who put an end to the war 2 years ago, and the Marines allowed the remaining Whitebeard pirates to take Ace and Whitebeard's bodies with them. I guess that this is where they were buried. But why here? Sanji gasped. Of all places. If this island really is avoided by even pirates in the New World, it would make a good place to ensure that their graves aren't bothered, Robin offered as they drew nearer to it.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
No one said a thing as they continued running, and no one stopped until they finally reached the foot of the graves. Is it really? Usopp gasped as Zoro stepped forward. Real. Zoro. Frankie warned. Someone's been here, he said to them all. And he was right. It looked as if someone had visited this place just recently, a few says at most. There was a bottle of sake and some cups set up on a crate right in front of the grave. But what caught his attention was that there was a newspaper pinned to the grave by a knife and the strong smell of the flowers filled his nose. He bent down and stretched out his hand to touch the cold stone. He could feel it, it was real. Zoro. Chopper asked as he sighed. It's no dream, Zoro confirmed. He looked to the article, smoothing the weathered pages so that he could read it and saw that it was an article about the Straw Hat's return. He smiled a little, it appeared that someone came here to let Ace know that his brother was alive and doing well. Everything seemed so calm, somewhat beautiful as the wind softly blew some of the petals through the air, making them look like they were dancing through the wind. I still can't believe it, Nami whispered, still staring at Ace's name as Chopper came over and placed the flower petal at the foot of the grave. All this time we were running around, watching these memories, and we find Ace's grave here. Wow, Usopp whispered. I knew that Ace was gone but to see it here. Brook suddenly walked over and looked up to it. Hello, Ace-san, he said. It truly is an honor to be here. My name is Brook, all bones Brook, and I'm the musician on your brother's crew. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Likewise, Robin smiled as she also came forward. It's a surprise to find you here. Zoro stood up, gazed sadly at the name, remembering the memories that they had seen. We're sorry, he said. The Straw Hats all looked to him in confusion, wondering why he felt the need to apologize. We were supposed to keep an eye on Luffy for you, Zoro went on, speaking to Ace. But instead, we weren't there. I don't know what happened after the war, but I'm sure that it must have been really hard for Luffy. The one time that he needed us there, we weren't. They all suddenly understood and felt shame wash over them all. Ace put his brother's safety into their hands, and they failed, time and time again probably. Because they were all too weak, they couldn't keep each other safe. Chopper didn't seem to take it anymore. He ran up to it and cried out, please forgive us, Ace. It's all our fault, isn't it? Please don't hate us. Chopper, Nami said softly, unable to think of anything else to say. But to their frustration, the memories started up again and there were several cries from everyone that wanting to stay with the grave a little longer. Their gloomy mood didn't disappear even as they spotted their past selves running up from the distance. They didn't want to leave from where they stood, they wanted to stay and try to work out their feelings, but their past selves were coming fast, still running through the mostly deserted streets of Rainbase. What do we do? Usopp asked quickly. What other choice is there? Sanji demanded, practically grinding his teeth at all this. He felt like he was losing his mind here. He wanted to just get Luffy and leave this whole stupid island behind them. But they were forced to just run with the memory Straw Hats, each one feeling sick with themselves here. As soon as this mess is over we're coming back. Frankie decided for all them, and none of them were able to disagree. Suddenly past Usopp was yelling at the others. Hey, he yelled. Please tell me you guys aren't thinking of running all the way to Alubarna. We've got Eyelash. Memory Nami reminded him before she seemed to realize that he was nowhere to be found. Just where the hell is that stupid camel anyway? We lost track of him after we were chased by the Marines, current Zoro stated. I have no idea what's been going on since we were stuck in that stupid cage. Don't worry. Chopper reminded them quickly, who was now fighting the tears as he pictured Ace's name on that cold stone in his mind. Sanji told me that we were going to need a ride, so me and Eyelash were getting one. You mean more camels? Frankie asked. Something a little faster, Usopp told him. Close I hope. Luffy yelled back to Nami. Hey, doesn't this town have stables? Let's get some horses. But the whole town is crawling with Marines. Vivi reminded him. Not to worry. Memory Sanji yelled with a smile, look up ahead. And they saw it. Chopper and Eyelash were on the back of the largest crab any of them had ever seen, big enough for all of them to ride. His face was grinning happily, with rope attached to either side of its mouth as it moved sideways, heading straight towards them. Wow, that would make one hell of a crab cake, Frankie yelled out, his stomach was roaring with hunger. That's Scissors, current Chopper called joyfully. Scissors, Robin repeated lightly. That's the name we gave him, Nami answered smiling. He helped to get away from this place. Hey you guys, Memory Chopper yelled, waving when he saw them. Hop on, Memory Usopp screamed, his eyes bugging out so that he looked like the crab. A crab, Chopper, Memory Nami yelled in shock as Vivi gasped in amazement at the moving crab, she called it. But Luffy was actually drooling when he saw it, obviously thinking one thing until Chopper called out that he was going to give them a ride. We get to ride it. Luffy cried happily as Chopper explained that Eyelash was born here in Rainbase and had lots of friends. So I guess finding that camel wasn't a bad thing after all, Sanji admitted grudgingly, still a part of him wished that he could have cooked that sucker up. Yeah, at least here, Nami didn't have to hog the whole ride herself, Usopp added. Shut up, Nami yelled, hitting him over the head. I can't believe you found one. Vivi said as Scissors used his claw to raise them off the ground and onto his back. Moving crabs are always submerged under the sand, so it's nearly impossible to spot one. Yeah, it wasn't easy getting him to come out, Chopper admitted, but he said that he and Eyelash were friends, so he said that he'd help us out. He didn't tell them that Eyelash also mentioned that there were a couple really hot dancer girls with them, and Scissors practically fell over at that. Judging by its size, I'm guessing that this guy can move pretty fast, Memory Zoro said as he looked at it in interest, his sword over his shoulder. Alright, Memory Chopper declared, Luffy hanging onto the crab's eye as he shook out the reins and they started moving off at an incredible speed. Wow, Frankie called out, looking out at the entire scene. This thing can move. You should be at this Alubarna place in no time. Yeah, well, we ran into a few troubles as well, Usopp sighed, remember having to swim across the Sandora and almost eaten before the Kung Fu Dugongs helped them out. But just as they were gaining speed, really starting to enjoy the ride, they heard Vivi screaming in terror behind them. Startled, they all turned around to see, to their horror, that Crocodile's hook had hooked her around the waist and was pulling her backwards, away from them. Where the hell did that come from? Frankie yelled out in panic. It's Crocodile. Brooke screamed at the same time. The Memory Straw Hats were as freaked out as they were, and past Zoro screamed at Chopper to stop the crab, which he did so suddenly that they were almost flung off. But as Luffy steadied himself, he glared out into the distance. It's him, he yelled as he stretched out his arms to grab hold of the hook and rocketed himself to her. What's he doing? Frankie yelled out at once, his eyes wide. What he wanted to do from the start, Zoro answered, gritting his own teeth. He did not want to see this. He knew that Luffy lost this first match against Crocodile, but he didn't know how bad it had been. And it was only increasing his feelings of shame after seeing Ace's grave with his own eyes. Luffy had grabbed hold of Vivi in the meantime, and he then switched places with her. Holding onto the hook, he freed her and threw her back towards the rest of the group. But there wasn't enough time for him to let go as he was dragged back. Hey, Luffy, Memory Zoro yelled after he caught Vivi. That damn idiot, past Sanji added furiously. Took the words out of my mouth, current Sanji nodded firmly. He still didn't know what that idiot was thinking here. Luffy, no, Vivi screamed in terror as they watched Luffy being pulled back. But Luffy was grinning back, as if he had this all planned out. Hanging upside down, staring back at them with his arms still hooked, he called, you guys go on ahead. Don't worry about me. How could we not worry about you, you moron? Present-day Usopp demanded at once as he landed rather anticlimactically near Crocodile's feet. The current Straw Hats jumped down from the crab as well to stay behind. Luffy was still upside down, on his head with his feet dangling out as he called back to the others, make sure you deliver Vivi home safe and sound. You have to promise me. He sure doesn't seem worried, does he? Brooke asked. When does he ever? Sanji sighed. He looked back to them all and he could see that they all looked how he felt. None of the past Straw Hats looked the least bit happy as they stared at him. He knew that each of them was struggling within themselves to do it. Follow their captain's orders and to leave without him, or to take him with them and risk all getting killed by Crocodile. He saved us here, Zoro sighed. If we stayed, Crocodile would have followed after us for sure, and who knows how many of us would have been killed. He looked back to Luffy's smiling face, and knew that he was just like his brother in this way. Good luck you guys, Luffy stated softly, but somehow knew that they could hear him. Past Zoro had a rather rough smile plastered on his face, as if he was fighting hard not to be sick with himself. But he nodded in understanding and acceptance as he ordered Chopper to just keep going to Alubarna. Wait, you mean you just left him there? Brooke called in panic. It was Captain's orders, Sanji reminded him angrily. And we all knew that we had to get Vivi home if we wanted to stop this rebellion. We put our trust in him and just hoped for the best. So he beat Crocodile here? Frankie asked at once as Memory Chopper ordered Scissors to keep going, but looked ready to cry. Not quite, Robin answered. Though she claimed to Crocodile that she had left, the truth was that she stayed close enough so that she could watch and see what happened. Luffy lost this first match against him, she informed them. He couldn't figure out Crocodile's weakness until the very end. He survived however, and he came back to challenge him. Usopp and Chopper both gulped as they looked at each other. They remembered when they fought that Mole Woman and Mr. Four, how they claimed that Luffy was dead. They were suddenly terrified of what was about to happen for them to say such a thing. So he lost, Frankie said, almost in a daze. You can't win every fight all the time, she answered. But he lived through it, that's what matters.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
And I can tell you that he became a real thorn in Crocodile's side before the end of it. What do you? Nami began, but the moving crab was almost out of their sights, and they could vaguely hear some of the Straw Hats arguing with each other. Some of them wanted to go back for Luffy, while others insisted that they should just keep going. But then, just before they were out of earshot, Vivi's voice called out, Luffy. Listen, we'll be waiting for you. We'll be in Alubarna. And here, she finally decides to trust him, Zoro said softly, wondering if she finally understood what it was that needed to be done here. But he would worry about that later as he turned his attention back to the three who were standing there. Luffy still lay on his head as both Crocodile and Robin stood behind him, watching them leave with unreadable expressions on their faces. So he stayed back to fight him by himself. Frankie gulped. I mean, come on. He can't think that he could fight a warlord off on his own like this, did he? He did underestimate Crocodile here, Robin admitted. He was lucky that he wasn't killed. But he did scare Crocodile for a moment. He did. Chopper asked as she nodded. She remembered seeing how Luffy was impaled with that hook and Crocodile had been sure that he had killed him, only for him to see that he was still breathing. She supposed that had been the closest she had seen to him, taken back by shock, that she could ever remember seeing. For just a second though, she finished. Well, he got him in the end, Sanji reminded them as the wind blew over the sand and they watched as Memory Robin spoke up. You could say that Princess Vivi slipped through our fingers. But Crocodile didn't seem too upset by it. No matter, he said causally. The agents are still scheduled to gather in Alubarna. Contact them at once. Yeah, that was a very bad day, Usopp whispered as he rubbed his nose as he remembered all that pain. What happened? Brook asked at once, but Nami shook her head, letting him know that they'll tell them later as Crocodile looked down his nose at Luffy. Straw Hat, I'd say you've taken this nonsense a little too far. Luffy, whose face had turned hard and serious, finally flipped himself upright and began to pull off the blue scarf that was wrapped around his head and hat. Nonsense, he repeated softly, Vivi doesn't see it that way. You see, unlike most people, she generally cares about others. Yeah, I doubt that you have enough kindness in you to fill up a teaspoon. Sanji added darkly, how dare you do all this to a lady? That's an unforgivable sin in my book. In the meantime, Crocodile kept looking at Luffy in a bored way as he finished dusting off all the sand from his clothes. I guess deep down she's an optimist, Luffy went on, even if it's not too realistic. Take this revolt for example, she believes that nobody needs to die. Nobody needs to die, Crocodile repeated with a smirk, highly amused at that. The problem with idealist fools like Princess Vivi is they take a stand without any comprehension of what is truly involved in a real fight. Wouldn't you agree? Well, I'll give him that, Robin sighed. She truly is too tender-hearted for her own good. As well as naive. It's sad to admit that the real world isn't like that, people get hurt all the time. She wants everything, but doesn't want anyone to make any sacrifices for it, Zoro nodded dully. If she can't accept the fact that there will be sacrifices, then she should just give it up, saving anything. Do you two have to be so depressing? Nami snapped at them, but Luffy seemed to agree with them. Yep, he answered as he stood up. But that doesn't change the fact that as long as you're around, Vivi's gonna fight until she either wins or dies trying. So I figure, his eyes turned dangerous as he stared him down, I'll take you down right here. You tell him, Luffy. Usopp cheered, but Crocodile merely chuckled at that. Such a foolish boy, he said casually. Despite what the idealists cry about, there's one constant truth. On the rough battlegrounds of life, you either kill or die. That's why I'm more than happy to shoot a bullet through every bleeding heart I meet. The guy's got a heart of gold, doesn't he? Frankie asked sarcastically. Well, Mr. Sunshine here is gonna see his plans go up in smoke, right? Ya got that right, Sanji said with a satisfied smirk. Bastard deserved it. It was more than filling to see him get beat, Nami nodded firmly. Looks like we're finally about to see how that all happened, huh? Luffy finished dusting himself off as he cracked his knuckles together. Yeah, he said, which proves you're the bigger fool. He said it now, Robin said, shaking her head with a slight smile on her face. She was right, for Crocodile's eyes turned dangerous and he bit down on his cigar so hard that it broke apart. Memory Robin, however, was chuckling to herself at Luffy's words, holding her fingers up to her mouth as she tried to fight the urge to laugh out loud. You know, he sure doesn't have to try hard to tick people off, does he? Nami asked knowingly. Nope, Usopp agreed, one would call it a gift. Crocodile glared at Robin out of the corner of his eyes, seeing her laughing. You think something's funny? He growled at her, as if daring her to answer. Perhaps you'll like to die as well, Nico Robin. How dare he threat you, Robin-chan? Sanji yelled, looking ready to attack this time, but Robin saved him the time and the energy by holding him back. Letting him know that it was alright. He needed me, so he wasn't planning on killing me here, she informed him, being very careful how she worded it. She knew that they weren't going to like it when they find out when he did try to kill her, but she would face up to that when they got there. If you wanna try, go right ahead, Memory Robin said calmly, as if she couldn't care less with what he said. She turned away, still smiling before she asked as she walked away, and didn't you promise that you'd never call me by that name? You didn't like your name, Robin? Chopper asked in surprise as he looked up at her. It truly is a beautiful name, Robin-san, Brook added, and she smiled at that. Maybe, she said quietly, but it was safer this way to use a codename. The government had been after me for years, and I was forced to join with Crocodile in the first place because I needed protection. It was just easier this way. She always tried hard not to get too close to anyone during those 20 years, and not using real names helped for her to stay apart from them. Besides, she never liked Crocodile anyway. She just didn't like it when he used her name. She never approved of what he did to Alabasta, and she supposed that if he never used her real name, she wouldn't really have been a part of what happened. She shook her head, she just didn't know anymore. Where are you going? Crocodile demanded as they watched her retreating back. I headed to Alubarna, she called back without stopping or even looking back at them, see you there. Wow, you're the only person I know who's been able to stand up to him like that, Nami said impressed. The key was to show him that you weren't afraid. That you knew that they were in charge but you were no pushover either, Robin answered. Not the ideal situation, but it kept me alive this long. Damn woman, I'll never figure her out, they heard Crocodile mutter to himself as he reached into his coat and pulled out a small hourglass. He threw it to Luffy's feet and the sand inside it began to fall. I got 3 minutes to spare, he informed him as they looked to the hourglass. After that, I'm certain your time will have run out as well. You mean that he beat Luffy in 3 minutes? Chopper cried out in shock. It was actually a little longer than 3 minutes, Robin confessed, remembering the brutal injury that Crocodile gave him. But it was because Luffy wasn't paying attention and got too close. I'm not even sure I want to know. Usopp yelled out, cringing at all the horrible things that might have happened. He was beaten so bad that they all thought he was dead. What are you talking about? Nami asked. Me and Chopper fought 2 of Crocodile's agents. He answered. Mr. Four and a mole woman. Mole. Brooke repeated, sounding lost. Miss Merry Christmas is her name and she had the powers of the mole devil fruit, Robin explained. So you and Chopper took them out? Just barely, Chopper answered, but as we were fighting, they both said that Crocodile killed Luffy. Well, like Ace said, Crocodile isn't like some ordinary thug, Zoro said with a sigh. Beating him was never going to be easy. No, but it must have been brutal if Crocodile didn't think he had to worry about him anymore. Brooke gulped, not the least bit happy about this. This won't be pretty, Frankie said softly as they watched. The 2 faced off, the wind blowing around them so that their clothes rustled a little from the breeze. The air was so tense between the 2 they could almost feel it in the air around them. At long last, Crocodile spoke. Your 3 minutes are counting down, he informed Luffy. I don't have any more time to waste on you. After another brief pause, Crocodile seemed to grow bored as he held up his hook and taunted him by saying, it's your move, kid. With pleasure, Luffy said as he cracked his fingers. Gum gum, pistol. And with his trademark punch, he stretched out to hit him, but even though he hit him full on, it went right through him when he turned into sand. Cowards, Zoro said shaking his head. Logias don't like to fight without that stupid ability. They are so annoying to deal with. Yes, Robin agreed. However, despite their powerful abilities, they are far from truly being invincible. Sneak attacks are more likely to work, as the user will not be ready to avoid them. And especially inexperienced Logia users tend to be overconfident, as they are unaccustomed to physically dodging attacks, due to their powers. But Crocodile is far from inexperienced. They all felt a deep nervousness inside them as they turned back in time to see that Luffy just barely dodged as Crocodile flew at him and tried to stick his hook into his head. Luffy was forced to bend back into a handstand as he used his foot to try and kick him there. But once again, his attack did no damage as he dissolved into sand. In frustration, Luffy brought his foot back, and the impact knocking him to the ground and his robe was discarded as he caught his breath. Come on Luffy. Get up, Sanji yelled. Get your ass back in the fight. Don't know why you're so upset, Zoro said with a smirk, you'd be dead by this point if it had been you. What did you say, Moss Head? Sanji yelled, fire in his eyes. In that case you'd be dead before the fight even started. You want me to stab you? He demanded harshly. Shut up, Nami screamed at them. By now it should be quite obvious, Crocodile stated just then and his body was pulling back together as Luffy got back up from the ground, but I'll warn you. You cannot beat me. Luffy was grinding his teeth together as he glared at him and Crocodile finished, this is a lesson in futility. Naturally, Luffy didn't seem to care as he turned to face him, Gum Gum, Gatling gun. The attack that had been known to take out dozens of people at once, all went right through Crocodile as if he were made of air. Nothing, Frankie yelled in frustration. Damn, this is so stupid. Again, that's not surprising, Robin answered, hockey really is one of the only few ways to deal with them, but this was long before any of us even heard of it. Which is why we're stuck with finding creative ways to get around it. Luffy kept attacking until he had run out of breath and struggled for air as Crocodile reformed once again, smiling smugly at him as if he had just proven a point. Listen to my warning and take heed, Crocodile said, eyes closed, still smiling, if you continue with this senseless attack, you will have accomplished nothing. God, does this guy love hearing himself talk or what? Usopp whispered scathingly to himself as Luffy charged off once again, stretching his arms out for a Gum Gum bazooka. Even as he hit him with such a powerful attack, and sand came bursting from Crocodile's back, still unaffected as he merely looked on with a rather blank expression, as if this wasn't worth his time. Now getting desperate, Luffy sent his foot flying up into the air, ready to use the same attack that once tore up the Baratie and destroyed Arlong Park, and brought it back down to cut Crocodile in half. The dust was so thick that they couldn't see anything for a moment, but they didn't need to know just what was going to happen. When it cleared, there was no signs of Crocodile and Luffy was breathing hard, stomping furiously in the sand as he screamed out, damn you, you lousy, old, stupid sand gator. Luffy, behind you, Nami couldn't help herself screaming out when Crocodile reformed behind Luffy this time. "You're wasting your time, boy," he said in that same bored tone, and Luffy was becoming more angry with every passing second. "You bastard," he cried out, spinning around to face him. "No matter how hard you fight against the truth, there's no way that a rubber freak like you could even hope to rival me," Crocodile said just as Luffy lost it and punched his mouth, getting rid of part of his face before he yelled out, taking several breaths, "I'm sorry. My fist interrupted you." Now what was that? He did it now. Robin frowned, knowing that Luffy was about to pay heavily for his insults here. "But you can't help but admit that he's got a lot of balls for standing up to him like that." Frankie laughed and they all snickered a little, despite the fear they all felt in the pits of their stomachs. "But that alone isn't enough to help him here," Zoro said knowingly as Crocodile's calm expression faded at that. He had been unruffled and collected the whole time they had fought up till now, but now he seemed to be close to losing his patience completely as he held up his gold hook. "I've had my fill of your pathetic fun and games," he yelled, no longer playing around. "Let's end this now." "Fun and games," Luffy repeated angrily as he wiped some of the sweat from his face. "Trust me, I'm dead serious, jerk." But then he added to himself, "Damn it, he's right though. He's got an answer for all my attacks. What do I do now?" "You can do it, Luffy," Chopper yelled out, as if hoping that Luffy could hear him this time. "Yeah, knock his block off." Usopp and Brook cheered on. "We may both be pirates," Crocodile yelled as his right hand began to turn into a blade of sand. "But you fall grossly short on skill." He then brought his hand down and cried out his attack, Desert Spada. And from his hand came a fast-moving sand and then stabs it into the ground, extending it along the ground like a torpedo, splitting anything in its path, including the very ground itself. This wave of sand headed right for him. Luffy didn't think of moving until the wave hit a rock that was directly in its pathway and it was split right in half. "Damn it, Luffy, dodge it," Zoro yelled. He silently thanked whatever instincts that caused Luffy to move, for he stepped out of the way just in time. But when the dust cleared, some of them gasped at the deep ravine that had been formed from that attack. That was too close," Sanji gulped as he felt a little bit of sweat drop from his forehead. "How did that?" "This is the real power of sand," Robin answered softly. "Drying out and erosion, this attack is strong enough to slice a normal man in half." Nami stared out at the damage. She never believed that someone could split sand apart like that. And if that hits Luffy? She had to force the mental image of Luffy being torn right in half out of her mind and shuddered. Crocodile then surprised them all by giving Luffy a compliment as he turned his hand back to normal. "Nice reflexes, boy. A full-on hit from that attack would have killed you." "You think?" Usopp yelled as Luffy looked down the chasm that Crocodile created with a shocked expression. "What the? That's one deep hole," he cried as Chopper ran over to look for himself before he screamed. "I can't even see the bottom." Chopper yelled, freaking out. "You may have devil fruit powers," Crocodile went on as he held up his hand, his fingertips halfway to sand, and was being blown in the wind. "But you lack discipline and training. With that your skills could be as formidable as any. But you're not there yet. Like so many fools, you waste time obsessing over your abilities. Gimmicks get only you so far in a fight, without the skill set to back it up." Brook gulped at the dark amusement in Crocodile's voice. But he had to admit that he knew that much anyway. Relying too heavily on your devil fruit abilities, no matter what they are, is never a good thing. He hated the fact that he agreed with him on something, even if it was this. "You better think fast if you don't wanna die, Luffy," Frankie yelled just as Crocodile cried out, "Desert Girasole." And here, Crocodile created another loose sand blade from his hand. But this time, when he stabbed it into the ground this time, the area in front of him started to collapse. In its place was a giant pit where the sand was being sucked down like it was going down the drain. Luffy stared at him in confusion before he realized that he was being pulled right into the hole as well. "What in the?" Nami began in fear. "It's quicksand," Robin yelled out hurriedly. He needed to get out of there or else he'll be trapped underground. Luffy was already running as hard and as fast as he could to get himself out of the pit, but so far it wasn't doing him any good. He wasn't even going anywhere. He was yelling in panic, not getting what was going on as Crocodile watched in pleasure. "What's wrong? Never heard of quicksand," Crocodile called as Luffy kept running. Every few steps that he took he was being dragged back. At this rate he'd never get out. It makes for a convenient desert burial when you need to get rid of someone in a hurry. The sand is drawn down into underground waterways and I have the good fortune of being able to detect exactly where they are. That advantage alone is enough to make me unbeatable when fighting in the desert. If that's true, then how's he supposed to fight him? Usopp yelled in panic. He didn't like this memory at all, and since he knew that Luffy was destined to lose, it only made it all that much worse here. "If you think I'm going to let myself be buried alive in this sand trap, you've got another thing coming." Luffy yelled as his eyes widened with inspiration and he used another bazooka attack to propel himself right out of the trap. "Clever," Sanji said, impressed as Luffy shot up into the air and made a beeline straight for the warlord. "If I can't slug you," he cried as he laced his fingers together, "then maybe I can catch you instead." "And how can you catch sand in a net?" Nami yelled in frustration, and as his fingers tried to trap him, it was the same as before. Crocodile used a wave of sand to block the net. "Haven't you learned anything, moron?" he demanded, now sounding deeply annoyed. "Predictable. Shut up," Luffy yelled, trying to use a gum whip to try and cut him in half, but it was now getting desperate. How's he supposed to fight him if he can't even hit him? Usopp cried out, gripping his hair frantically. "That's the problem, he can't," Sanji yelled. Crocodile said that this was now getting old as he pulled his two halves back together. Suddenly, his powers worked like quicksand once again, and pulled Luffy in towards him. "Let me go," Luffy cried as he tried to pull his arm free. "I'm warning you. This is going to hurt," Robin said softly as she recognized the next attack. Crocodile swung his right arm forward while leaving a crescent-shaped trail of sand behind it. "Crescent Cutlass," he cried and slashed at Luffy's arm. Luffy then screamed in pain as he grabbed his arm and jumped away so that he landed hard on his back. "What did he do?" Nami cried, half expected to see a blood stump where his arm once was, but what she saw caused her to scream in terror. For his entire right arm to his elbow had been dried up, mummified. Chopper screamed out in shock as everyone but Robin looked on, just horrified as Luffy screamed and thrashed around. All the liquid in his arm had been sucked dry, Robin answered softly. "One of his most devastating attack. This is bad. If it stays like that it could crumble and he could lose all ability to use his arm." Chopper cried out. "He needs water." Luffy was staring at his shriveled up arm, unable to believe what he was seeing. "What did you do?" he demanded from where he lay. "It's all shriveled up. Like a mummy. You turned my arm into a mummy." "Stop whining," Crocodile called to him dully. "This is the price you pay. The sand has absorbed all the moisture from your arm. You're lucky all I decided to attack was your arm. I can do this all day long until you're a pile of dust." "I don't ever want to shake that guy's hand," Frankie stated. "Can he really do that?" Usopp cried to Robin. "Can he really suck all the liquid from a person? Remember how Mr. 3 looked when he came out of that wax ball?" she asked. "Hadn't you been wondering how he got like that?" And even then, Crocodile didn't suck all the moisture from his body. He still had some left in him, and that's how he was able to survive as long as he did inside that banana gator until he was saved. But he can go much farther than that, and continue to suck all the liquid from a person until they're nothing but dried up husks. So even if Luffy's able to touch him, he can still die. Usopp asked at once. This was sounding more impossible by the second. Luffy was slowly sitting up as he gasped for more air. "You've got to be kidding me," he said before his eyes lit up as if he had a sudden idea. Before they could ask what he was thinking, he suddenly ran towards the robe that he threw off when he started fighting Crocodile. Throwing it aside, he found what he was looking for, the little water barrel that Toto gave him from Yuba. "All right," Nami called smiling. "Looks like that Yuba water did the trick." And like that, once Luffy drank from it, the much-needed water flowed into his arm and it was returned to normal. Chopper sighed in relief. "Thank goodness. Looks like we owe Toto one for that," Sanji said with a smile. "Now I'm suddenly glad that Luffy didn't let me drink from it," Usopp whispered as Crocodile still looked bored and let him know that he thought it was all in vain. "You're wrong, Sandy," Luffy yelled and raised the water up for him to see. "You see that old guy in Yuba gave me this barrel water, he spent all night digging it up just for me. He's not scared and neither am I." He got back to his feet, having found his second wind. "I'm not about to give in to the sand, without a fight." And he charged towards Crocodile again. Gum. This is getting ridiculous," Crocodile asked, slightly annoyed, standing still for another punch or kick, but Luffy did something different. Munch. Luffy cried as he stretched out his mouth wide enough to actually bite down and ate half of Crocodile's body. There was silence as they watched. "You mean to tell me he ate him?" Usopp whispered, his jaw hitting the ground as he stared. "Whatever works for you I say," Sanji said, shaking his head. "What an idiot," Zoro said, not sure if he should laugh or not. Robin however was laughing out loud, remembering this as well. "That's one way to win a fight," she said smiling, "and I was wondering where he came up with such a ridiculous idea." "Bet he didn't see that coming," Frankie cried out, also starting to laugh once the shock wore off. But Luffy was looking a little sick, as if he had swallowed something truly disgusting and then the sand version of Crocodile burst from his mouth. "Enough. This ends now." Crocodile screamed in rage and Luffy was thrown back onto the ground, coughing up the sand that he swallowed. Crocodile was glaring at him, the redness in his eyes standing out, truly looking put out at being humiliated here. "Vermin," he snarled, "it is time to die. Both you and the accused land of Yuba." Luffy was still spitting out sand as Crocodile looked to the hourglass to see that the sand had run its course. Robin stopped laughing as she knew what was about to come. "Your 3 minutes are up," he said, "like I said at the start. I don't have time to fool around with you any longer." And then, it was here that he created another sandstorm with his right hand, one so big that Luffy was forced to cover his face as he tried to force himself to stand tall. "What's he doing now?" Usopp yelled as the massive tornado of sand was now spinning wildly. "Nothing good," Robin answered back over the noise. Crocodile was standing there with his eyes closed for a moment, as if he was merely enjoying a soft breeze from the ocean. "Ah, the sand's so soothing and dry," he said to himself before he looked to Luffy and asked, "Listen carefully. Can you hear it move? In this land the prevailing wind always blow from north to south. And so, if this infantile sandstorm of mine were to say catch one of these winds, it would grow until it became a monster. And following its path south, where do you think it would strike?" Nami's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "That coward," she screamed out as Luffy demanded to know where. "Don't tell me," Sanji cried out as Crocodile grinned. "In Yuba," he answered. "No," Brook cried out. "That Todo gentleman didn't do anything. Why is he going after him?" "To prove that he can," Robin answered softly. "He's trying to get Luffy to lose his temper and attack recklessly, which is how he was able to win." "What a dirty trick," Usopp yelled in outrage. Luffy's eyes were wide with realization and anger. "No, not there." He screamed over the sandstorm and grabbed him by his coat. "Damn it, why the hell are you doing this? Stop it. Yeah, be man enough to fight this thing on your own," Usopp yelled. But Crocodile ignored Luffy's demands as he looked to the storm with a fondness, as if he were a proud parent. "Look," he said smugly, "it started. It's headed south. I knew that this guy was slime, but that is beyond dirty." Frankie yelled furiously. "That nice old man has nothing to do with this, you hear me?" Luffy yelled as he let go of him and actually went running to try and stop the storm. "Stop it, or I swear I'll kill you, you bastard." "How does he intend to stop it?" Nami cried out. "Unless he can change the wind, then there's nothing he can do about this." She was proven right as Luffy was thrown backwards, practically spinning through the air and landing back in the sand as the wind picked up speed. "You cannot alter fate," Crocodile advised as he looked back to the storm. "That sandstorm is gonna pick up strength. And eventually it'll become strong enough, that even I can't stop it." "I don't believe you, liar," Luffy screamed at the warlord. "Unfortunately he's right about that," Robin disagreed. "He just started it, but if he wanted to, he could have stopped it before it got out of his control. He's being unnecessary cruel." Chopper cried out worriedly. "I don't think that Yuba could have taken any more storms." "But that's what he does," Robin answered him. "Cruelty was what he was best at." "That bastard," Frankie growled. "Yuba is finished," Crocodile said with a serene smile as he shut his eyes, as if he was enjoying the moment. In a fit of rage, Luffy charged up to him and grabbed him by the coat again. "If you don't end it, I will," he screamed, but then he stopped dead, his threat dying on his mouth as his eyes widened, staring ahead of him as if in shock. "Luffy," Usopp croaked, not understanding what happened. "Luffy-san," Brook called worriedly. "What's wrong?" But Luffy still didn't speak as his hands slowly fell to his side, and when they finally looked down they saw why. Luffy was so distracted that he didn't notice that he had gotten too close. Crocodile's hook had struck him in the stomach. The entire hook had gone through his body as if he was made of butter, and was now sticking out of his back. "Luffy!" Almost all the crew screamed in panic as they stared at what happened. A single trail of blood dripped from Luffy's mouth as he fell forward on Crocodile's arm, limp as a rag doll. "Luffy!" Usopp screamed again, grabbing his slingshot and fired a Firebird star, just as Brook had charged forward as well, his sword now aimed for Crocodile's head. But both attacks passed right through him. Brook's blade passed through like air and Usopp's shot went flying off far into the distance since there wasn't anything in their way. "There's no point, you guys," Sanji yelled, but he too looked ready to charge in. "This is bad," Chopper screamed as Nami covered her mouth with her hands, too horrified to say anything. He could have ripped Luffy's heart right out. And even if he didn't, he could have still bled to death. "Is this really what happened?" Zoro called to Robin, who looked at him sadly. She nodded. Luffy was so angry about the storm that he didn't even realize what he was doing until it was too late. "I thought that he was dead for sure, at first. But then," Frankie began, but Chopper was screaming again and they looked up, rage going through them at what they saw. Crocodile was holding Luffy off the ground so that his full weight was on the hook. He was hanging there limply, blood now flooding from his body and dripping into a pool on the ground. Blood poured from his mouth and nose, dripping all over, and Usopp was hugging Brook as they looked away, unable to stand seeing a friend like this. "Did you really think you were my equal?" Crocodile asked him softly as they listened to the steady dripping of the blood from his hook. "There have been many number of rookies like you who challenged me. And you've all shared a common trait, fatal ineptitude. In the end, the only thing you are truly qualified for, is death. Let him go." Nami cried out almost tearfully, having to scream over the noise of the sandstorm that Crocodile created, which was now spinning much more wildly, and began making its way south. "This sandstorm will deal Yuba a final destructive blow," Crocodile told Luffy as he held him up a little higher. Luffy's eyes were now completely empty, his mouth wide open, and he was no longer breathing. "Adding the flames of anger within the rebel army until an inferno ignites. But in the end, the bleeding hearts which infest this land will be what kills it." He smiled fondly at his plan as he shook his arm out so that Luffy's limp body was forced to move back so that they could all see his face more clearly, and Zoro was gritting his teeth, daring Crocodile to keep talking, just to have another reason for him to kill him someday. If only you had purged yourself of such weakness you may have lived a little longer, Crocodile said almost sympathetically. But despite all the bragging, he almost failed to notice the destroyed water barrel that his hook also pierced when he rammed his hook into Luffy's body. Water? Crocodile questioned absent-mindedly before he smirked. I assume that you don't feel so indebted to this water now. Let go of him, Chopper screamed, looking ready to charge, no longer caring if this was a memory or not. But then Crocodile received the shock of his life as Luffy's hand suddenly flew up and grabbed hold of his arm. Crocodile took a step backwards at that and suddenly he yelled out. Most of the Straw Hats thought that this was shock, but Robin knew better, it was from pain. The water from Luffy's wet hand was allowing him to touch his arm. Perhaps Luffy realized this as well, for suddenly he was starting to move again, struggling for air as he tried to breathe, choking and coughing up even more blood. How the hell can he still be alive from that? Frankie yelled as Usopp howled in pain from just watching it all. Oh, it hurts just looking at it. Brook cringed in pain, hugging his body tightly. Crocodile was staring at him in complete shock, maybe even a little fear. What's this? You're still alive, he cried out before he angrily threw him from his hook into the quicksand so that he rolled down to near the bottom. Luffy, Chopper cried, running down to him as well, tears in his eyes as he looked over the wound. Luffy suddenly turned over and was now screaming in anguish as he held onto the bleeding hole and blood was bubbling up, seeping everywhere. Is it bad? Usopp cried down at them as he also followed. Is it bad? Chopper yelled up at him. It's more than bad. It's a miracle that he wasn't killed. If Crocodile was just a little more to the left, he could have hit Luffy's heart. He's in circulatory shock. Shock what? Frankie demanded. Just shock. Chopper yelled in frustration. It can be life-threatening. Circulatory shock is a life-threatening medical emergency and one of the most common causes of death for critically ill people. Wait, you mean that it could kill him? Usopp yelled, never understanding any of Chopper's doctor language. Once it starts, it usually gets worse. Chopper yelled, and the patient needs to be treated at once. What it means is that Luffy's not getting enough oxygen. But he's breathing, Sanji yelled. Just because he's breathing doesn't mean that his body is getting the oxygen that it needs in the right body parts. Chopper yelled angrily, and if that's not going to kill him, blood loss will. Luffy was struggling for breath as he writhed around in pain, the sand now starting to cause him to sink, and with no way to pull himself out of it this time. That looks like it hurts, Crocodile observed smugly. But you'll be out of your misery soon enough. You shut up. Nami shrieked up at him as Luffy must have comprehended that he was sinking and was trying to thrash around to get out. The memory around them all was fading in and out, sometimes blurry and others clearer, but it was steadily growing darker by the second and Luffy just couldn't seem to will himself to move. As they looked up they could still make out Crocodile's form standing there. Luffy raised his hand, as if he was trying to reach for one last attack on Crocodile as he turned and disappeared as the rays of sun stared going down. Goodbye, they heard his slimy voice say as Luffy tried one last time to give chase, but it was no use. The sand was drawing him in very slowly. Luffy, you gotta dig yourself out. Usopp yelled, but he wanted to pull his hair out when he remembered that he couldn't do anything to help him. I can see why they all thought that Crocodile killed him, Nami whispered as the sound of the sandstorm slowly faded away as it headed south, and the sunlight disappeared as the darkness set in. Luffy's breathing was now a deep rasping gasp and his vision was so bad that they could only just make out shapes and shadows around them as he continued sinking deeper. This is your fault. Sanji suddenly yelled at Zoro, who told you to take the rest of us and order us to go on. You're not the captain. Shut up. You think that I wanted to leave him behind. Zoro yelled at him, furious that he would blame this on him. He gave the order to go on ahead without him. What else could we do? He could have died here. Sanji screamed back at him. And if he had, there was no way that I was going to follow you as a captain. Who said I wanted to be? Zoro demanded, turning back to glare at him as two of his swords were out and the two were facing each other, looking ready to kill here. That's enough, Nami yelled, standing between them. Luffy's not dead and that's all that matters. He recovered from this so it really wasn't that serious, was it Chopper-san? Brook asked as the others tried to break Zoro and Sanji apart. Chopper was now going crazy that he couldn't even touch his captain to help him as he looked him over. He's lost so much blood. Some of the shock has lessened and that's good, but he needs medical care and he needs it now. The sun had set completely by the time that they were finally able to pull the two apart, both of them still glaring daggers at the other, as if they wished for nothing but a very painful death for the other. But then, only Luffy's head was still above the sand and he was still struggling to pull himself out. Even at full strength he'd have a problem getting out of that. Nami whispered fearfully, how in the world did he get out of this? Just then, Luffy spoke, with his last breath, he called out at the top of his lungs just before his head disappeared beneath the sand. Really Luffy? Frankie yelled, some of them actually falling over at that. He's knocking at death's door here and all he can think about is meat. Usopp cried out, not getting that idiot. But of course, those would be his last words wouldn't they? But then the sand piled on top of him and the memory faded out almost completely. Luffy. The three, weakling trio, cried out in horror, not able to think of any way that Luffy could get out. He is the only one here aside from Crocodile who knew what happened. It'd be hours until the sun rose and someone would even be out to see what the commotion was. Usopp was vainly trying and dig through the sand, but his hands kept passing right through everything he touched. He just couldn't take it. But just as they were starting to give up on anyone else coming, they could hear the sounds of crunching sand. Someone was here. And then the next second, they were back in the open air. Luffy was being lifted out of the sand by arms. Robin, Zoro stated in shock, so distracted that he forgot about killing the cook. I thought you left. Brook called out loudly. I stayed out of the way so that I could watch, she said softly. I made it back to Alubarna in time so that Crocodile wasn't suspicious. So you saved him, Chopper called happily. She shook her head. Hardly, she said. I dug him out of that trap, yes, but I wasn't the one who took care of him. But then, Nami asked in confusion as memory. Robin looked down at Luffy's bleeding form with curiosity. Luffy was a real mess. He was still breathing hard and he was now drenched in his own blood. My God, Frankie said, feeling a little green as he looked over him, and Chopper was by his side, trying desperately to apply pressure to stop the bleeding, but he was yelling in frustration. Nevertheless, Luffy opened his bloodshot eyes and turned his head painfully towards Robin and croaked out, thank you. This Robin didn't say anything for a moment before she finally asked, why do you fight? Everyone was surprised by the question, probably Luffy most of all, as he gave her a look of confusion. She must have understood the unasked question because she added, those of you with the name of D. Usopp repeated, not understanding what Robin was going on about. I remember you once asked Rayleigh about that, Nami spoke up. I didn't understand, but is there something special about Luffy because he has AD in his name? I'm not sure, Robin confessed. But, I noticed that those who have this initial, there's something special about them. Gaul D. Roger, Portgas D. Ace, Monkey D. Dragon, Monkey D. Luffy. She trailed off here. She didn't know, but it was something that she had always thought about since she met Saul. Those who have the D, are people who seem to possess wills that defy common sense. She supposed that she hoped that Luffy would tell her what it all meant, but she knew now that she probably knew more about the matter than Luffy did. Maybe it's a coincidence, Usopp offered, and Robin nodded absent-mindedly. She didn't say anything else on the matter, but she knew that it was far more than chance. There was something big here, she was willing to bet her life on it. D. Luffy repeated with a choke, clearly not understanding what she was talking about. She didn't seem surprised at that as she continued looking at him, nearly dissatisfied as she sighed. Apparently you don't have a clue what I'm talking about, she said, the disappointment in her voice clear as she looked away where another of her hands had appeared, pulling out the straw hat and threw it towards her like a frisbee, which she caught. But as she looked at it, an angry voice called out behind them, I've found you. All of them turned in time to see a pale-looking man using a sword as a crutch for him to walk. He was a rather tall man with purple lines under each eye that ran down the sides of his face, making him look a little like a falcon. He was dressed in a long, white robe with star-like motifs. He looked to be almost as big a mess as Luffy was, like he just fought for his life out of a heavy battle. He barely seemed able to walk. Pell, Sanji said in surprise. Who is that? Brook asked them. He was one of Vivi's friends. Chopper said. Pell the Falcon, Robin answered. He is one of the 2 head guards in Alabasta that served under Agaram and one of the strongest fighters in the entire kingdom. What happened to him? Frankie asked, looking at him as he leaned heavily on the sword, blood dripping from his mouth. He looks like he was beaten to within an inch of his life. Where is Vivi? Pell demanded, glaring at Robin. He was, Robin answered as her past self, politely fanned herself with the straw hat and asked, awake already? I'm guessing that you might have had something to do with the state he's in. Zoro asked Robin. How dare you accuse Robin of something like that, you bastard? Sanji yelled at him furiously. Actually, that's about right, she answered. After I was told to get Vivi, I had to fight him to get her to come with me. OWW, Usopp winced, knowing of the kind of brutality that she was capable of. Well, Sanji said firmly, he deserved it if he tried to attack a lady. Dumbass, did you already forget what he did for us? Zoro snapped at him. What did he? Brook began before Pell called out, now that I've studied your ability, this won't turn out like last time. He looked ready to draw his sword and fight her right then and there. But she didn't seem concerned as she causally tossed Luffy's hat so that it fluttered on top of his chest. Be careful, Pell, she warned, you don't want to push yourself. His spine was almost broken in half, current Robin stated. I really was surprised he came back as soon as he did. Pell still tried to make his way towards her, wanting to fight, but Chopper bit his lower lip in worry. He was in bad shape and shouldn't even have been walking, let alone fighting. Robin turned away and they were startled to see a strange alligator in the sand waiting for her. They were all suddenly reminded of when she left the Mary the first time on the back of that giant turtle. As she headed to it, she called back causally, perfect timing. Why don't you can save the boy before he dies? Cold way to put it, but he's the one who took care of him then. Frankie asked. I guess so, Nami answered as Pell looked over to spot Luffy laying there, his blood now soaking the sand around him. After all, he is the brave knight who brought your precious princess back alive, past Robin informed him. What was that? Sanji demanded of her loudly. What do you mean brave knight? Well, if you're Mr. Prince. She offered and he stopped to think about that as she smiled. The rest of them all shook their heads in exasperation at Sanji's expression as he nodded in firm understanding. Pell was looking at Luffy in surprise as memory Robin went on, it must please you to know Vivi's safe. That even as we speak she's on her way towards Alubarna. She stepped onto the ladder to the desert croc as she finished, though it's a long trip and anything could happen. Yes, the situation is what it is. Pell was growling furiously as she took her seat and the gator led at an amazing speed, just as fast as the moving crab had moved as Pell fell to his knees, unable to stand up any longer. They could all tell that even a short walk was painful for him in the shape he was in. But Luffy suddenly dragged himself over to him, with Chopper crying at him to stop moving, but Luffy ignored his own injury as he grabbed Pell's sleeve, who looked back in surprise. As he tried to pull his arm free, Luffy looked up and gasped out, "Meat." Luffy, now is not the time to be worrying about your stomach. Chopper screamed out as Luffy kept coughing up blood, and Pell realizing the full extent of his injuries. Hey, kid, he asked in concern, are you alright? Need meat, was all he answered him, meat. Meat. Pell repeated in bafflement. You get used to it, Pell, Frankie stated. You don't need food now. Pell went on, that's the least of your worries. He got back up and staggered a few feet away in the direction of the city. Hang on, I'll get a doctor for you. Thank you. Chopper gasped, glad that Luffy was finally going to get some real medical care. But Luffy hadn't let go of his sleeve and it wasn't until Pell was a good 10 feet away before he realized it. He looked back and seemed startled at his stretched out arm. As Luffy spoke into the sand, I'm gonna make sure that Crocodile pays for this. Oh, he sure did, Zoro said, remember with great satisfaction of seeing Crocodile falling through the sky, and landing right smack dab in the middle of the square where all the fighting was. Yeah, Crocodile sure got his due here. Pell stared at him, his eyes widening at Crocodile's name as Luffy croaked out, he insulted, Vivi, and that old man with the shovel who gave me water. He gave a shuddering gasp, he's definitely gonna pay. Pell seemed at a loss for words before he slowly limped back to him as Luffy still muttered about meat. It was at that moment that the memory around them faded and Nami hugged Robin and she blushed a little in embarrassment as Zoro asked, not that it matters, nor am I complaining about it, but why? Weren't we all enemies? Why did you save him? Robin only smiled sadly to herself. Because he reminded me of a dear friend I once had. He died a long time ago when I was still a child. But this person will always hold a special place in my heart. Luffy reminds me a lot of him. So I just couldn't let him die here. I didn't know if he actually stood a chance against Crocodile, but I wanted to help at least a little. Who was your friend? Chopper asked softly. A man by the name of Saul, she answered and she shut her eyes. I don't like to be reminded of the past, but he's someone I owe so much to. Including my life. That's all I have to say on the matter. If you think that highly of him, he must have been a good man, Sanji said in deep respect. If this guy was someone that Robin remembered after all these years, then he was a true man who deserves nothing but reverence. Robin smiled sadly. He was, I am certain that you all would have liked him a great deal. Luffy especially. I'm sorry, Robin, Nami said softly as Robin shook her head, no longer understanding why she came out and told them about Saul. Maybe a part of her had thought that helping another man with the name of D, it would be like finally paying Saul back for all he did for her. She sighed, not sure she knew anything anymore. The next memory finally appeared and they were in the air. What the hell? Frankie yelled as some of them jumped in shock. What's going on here? We're flying. Usopp screamed in shock as he and Chopper held onto each other. How are we doing it this time? Because of Pell, Robin said, looking around, and sure enough she could see them coming towards them. Pell the Falcon, he ate the falcon model of the bird fruit and that gave him the power of flight. Oh, awesome. Frankie yelled excitedly. That's right, Chopper gasped, quickly calming down. I remember now. He could fly, couldn't he? Correct, Robin answered. After I left them back in Rainbase, I guess that Pell did take care of him and flew them back here once they recovered enough to move. Man, after such bad injuries too. Usopp whispered incredulously. Once they were close enough, they were all relieved to see that Luffy looked 10 times better than before. Though still a mess and had a thick bandage wrapped around the wound, he was looking like he was ready to go another round with anybody. He was tying a large barrel and hose around him so that he was able to carry it on his back and apparently having a long talk with Pell. So what is your connection to that woman? Pell asked. What woman? You mean the one who dug me out of the sand? Luffy asked him. Yes, Pell said, his eyes looking back at him. She is in Baroque Works, isn't she? But she helped you, didn't she? So how do you know her? I don't, Luffy answered truthfully. Well, after we met Vivi she was on our ship and tried to tell us where to go but I wouldn't listen. Again, I suppose I should have known better, Robin said in amusement. That dope never listens even when he should, Nami smiled. What a pain. But Vivi said that she was Crocodile's partner, Luffy finished. I see, Pell said softly. I suppose then that I should have been surprised that she dealt with me so easily, though it is hard to accept. Defeat always is, Zoro nodded firmly, his fingers going back to the scar on his chest and feeling how the pain of defeat hurt more than the injury he received. But, it's only through defeat do you truly learn so much more than you thought possible, Brook added softly. Very poetic, Brook, Robin smiled. I hear y'all, Luffy nodded, his hand over the spot where Crocodile's hook impaled him and his eyes hardened. But I'm going to take that croc out the next time I see him. We have to hurry to Alubarna. Finally, Luffy's acting serious here, Usopp said firmly. Alright, now Crocodile's going out as soon as they find him. And you truly are the one who brought Vivi back here to this country. Pell went on, asking with a deep worry in his eyes. Yeah, of course, Luffy called. And that itself had been one heck of a wild ride, Nami sighed as she felt a little bit of. In that case I owe you a deep thank you for protecting her for us while we were unable to, Pell said, and they could hear the gratitude in his tone. Where is she now? My crew took her to Alubarna while I stayed back to fight Crocodile, Luffy said. They should be there already. You sure about that? Pell asked worriedly. Don't worry, Luffy said brightly, thumping his chest before wincing in pain as he went on without any doubt in his mind, my crew'll get her there no problem. They can handle anything. Ah, Frankie said, blushing as some of the others were deeply touched by Luffy's confidence in them as several of the more emotional members were gaping at him with wide eyes. Damn it, how does he do that? Sanji hissed. He's too trusting for his own good. Is it bad that he trusts us? Chopper asked in surprise. It's sometimes a bad thing to get your hopes up too high, Nami sighed. Besides, Luffy went on as they continued on and could make out a city in the distance. I figured out Crocodile's weakness this time. His weakness? Usopp repeated in surprise. To keep Crocodile from turning to sand, Robin answered him. It's really quite simple and obvious if you think about it. What is it? Frankie called at once. Because I don't see how. Beware of Crocodile, Pell suddenly warned Luffy. For the last 3 years he had gotten rid of the pirates who had come here. It is how he had earned the trust of the people here. Each and every pirate was taken care of. Even if you're right about his weakness, that won't be enough to guarantee a victory. However, there is a saying here in the Grand Line, Logia devil fruit users who think they're invincible often die young. They all looked at each other, Ace's grave flashing in their eyes, and they all felt a strong sickness inside them as Pell finished. Even if that's true, Crocodile surely didn't become a warlord because of his powers alone. Don't worry, Luffy said firmly. I'm going to kick Crocodile's ass this time for sure. Pell must have understood the determination in his voice, for he nodded his head. Alright then, we're almost to Alubarna now. Onwards they flew over the great city, though at the moment it was almost impossible to see anything. There was a thick fog of sand and dust clouding their vision, so it was almost impossible to see anything on the ground. What's going on down there? Brook cried out, trying to make out where all the noise was coming from. There were screams of pain and they could make out the sounds of thousands of people fighting. As they flew a little lower, they were finally able to get a good look at what was going on. Rebels and royals were battling out in the square and streets, attacking anyone they thought was the enemy. It was complete and utter chaos as gunfire, cannonballs, and explosions filled the air. Blood was splattered all over the place and people were dropping like flies, neither side gaining or losing ground. It's even worse than I remember. Nami cried out, staring around in horror at all the death going on below them. Hell, you guys were down there. Frankie cried out. Yeah, Zoro said. Vivi tried to stop the rebels, but it was too late. Each of us were stuck fighting what was left of Baroque works. That was a nightmare, Usopp gasped. Me and Chopper were both stuck fighting a crazy muscle man, his weird dog gun hybrid, and a mole woman. A dog what hybrid? Brooke asked, not understanding a word he said. He means Mr. 4, Miss Merry Christmas, and Lasso, a gun that ate the dachshund model of the dog fruit, Robin answered for him. Wait, what? Nami stuttered. A gun, ate a devil fruit. Robin shrugged. I'm not completely sure how it works myself, she said as she suddenly thought of the sword that Spandam had, and how he claimed that it ate the elephant fruit. But though some method, even inanimate objects can eat devil fruits. They all looked at each other, completely lost. I didn't believe it either, Chopper confessed. And he was also able to spit out these baseballs that exploded. Mr. 4 was able to hit them even though they're as heavy as cannonballs and aim them at us. That sounds painful, Frankie said sympathetically. And his bat alone weighed about 4 tons. Usopp said knowingly, having been hit by that thing before. And that stupid mole woman kept slamming me through brick walls. Sounds like a bad day, Brooke stated. No duh, Sanji breathed out with his smoke. Meanwhile, I was stuck dealing with Ballerina Boy. You mean that Mr. 2 that you all got along so well with? Brooke asked in surprise. Yeah, Sanji admitted, and though he was an idiot, he had some decent kicks. I'll say that much of him. But if he didn't keep shifting over to Nami, he was sure that he could have taken him out without any problems. And so I take it that you too. Robin asked Zoro and Nami, who got what she was saying and nodded. Mr. One and his partner, Zoro nodded. Miss Doublefinger, Robin said, looking to Nami. I wasn't aware that you took her out. She had eaten the spike fruit I recall. Yeah, Nami agreed as she rubbed the shoulder that Miss Doublefinger once shoved a spike through. It's a shame though, even with all that power, she still couldn't do anything to her hair. Some of them laughed, but a little half-heartedly as Frankie asked. Spike, she is able to turn any part of her body into deadly sharp spikes, Robin answered. She is a skilled fighter and is known to be ruthless. But I do know that she had a bad habit of underestimating her enemies. Good thing for me, Nami sighed, shooting Usopp a deeply annoyed look. And I remember asking you to make me a weapon. But all it could do was stupid party tricks. Well, Usopp said quickly, it did have a few attacks didn't it? Oh, shut up, Nami snapped, suddenly angry. She was lucky that she wasn't killed here thanks to him. How in the world could he think that making a stupid prop for parties was helping her in the middle of a rebellion? And so you took out Mr. One? Robin asked Zoro, who nodded. Yeah, he answered, his hand on the white sword again. I actually owe him one. After all, if I didn't fight him, I never would have learned how to cut through steel. He showed you how to cut steel? Frankie asked in confusion. No, he answered, he ate the dice fruit and was able to turn any part of his body into a blade. As well as having a body as hard as steel. He was deadly to any swordsman, Robin nodded. After all, not just any swordsman could cut steel. And now you can cut through it like it's fruit. Chopper cried out, beaming up at him, and he grinned back. Yeah, it's easy once you figure out the trick to it, he grinned. Damn, Luffy's voice suddenly yelled, I can't see anything here. I don't know where everyone is. This storm isn't natural. Pell answered as they flew just a little bit higher so that they could look around farther. And if what you said was true about Crocodile being the one responsible for the constant sandstorms, then it doesn't surprise me that he would use that here. But why would he do it? Chopper asked. To make them angry, Zoro answered, which makes them stupid. Explains a lot about you, Moss head. Sanji asked. I hope that you die a painful death someday, dumbass. Zoro yelled at him furiously, going for his sword again. Where do you think Vivi is? Luffy asked again. Pell thought it over for a moment. The only place I can think of is with Chaka at the palace. She must be there. Let's go. And suddenly he turned sharply in the air, heading for the largest building, towering higher than all the others. Oh my. Brook cried out, it's breathtaking. That's the palace. What else would it be? Sanji asked before he noticed that there was someone standing up on the wall, overlooking the square. What's that? Usopp squinted his eyes and gasped at what it was. It's. But before he could finish, Chopper yelled out the rest for him. Vivi and Crocodile. They were right, Crocodile was holding Vivi by the throat, dangling her over the wall and had just let go of her so that she fell like a stone to the fighting below. My princess. Pell cried in horror as Luffy screamed out in shock. Come on, we have to get her. Luffy shrieked and Pell didn't need to be told that as he went into a steep dive and like a meteor, they fell towards the earth. Come on, Frankie cried out, wanting to bit his nails, if he still had some. But Brook was already biting his own fingers in fear as he watched, with Sanji now burning at what he was seeing. How dare that bastard do something like that to Vivi-chan? They were close enough that they could hear that horrible, power-dripping laugh of his, but that didn't last long for he was looking up and spotted them coming at them. CCCCRRRROOOCCC could deal LL Lee. Luffy screamed at the top of his lungs and Usopp actually laughed. I can only imagine what was going on in his head when he saw Luffy still alive. He cried out, probably thinking that he was a ghost or something is my bet, Frankie smirked. But how's he going to fight him here? Nami demanded furiously. He still doesn't know how to hit him, does he? I think you'll be surprised, Robin answered, and they looked to her. You mean you know Crocodile's weakness too? Zoro asked her. Of course, Robin answered, after all, I worked with him for 4 years. I did learn a few things about him. But watch. The falling Vivi heard his voice as well. Luffy. She screamed joyously, a hopeful smile back on her face as Crocodile let out a cry of disbelief. Leaning low over Pell, the two were able to swoop down and caught Vivi just above where all the fighting was happening, catching the ones below them off guard as they went soaring up high again, Vivi safe in Luffy's arms. Just in time, Luffy sighed in relief as Vivi clung tightly to him and Sanji was growling in jealously. Damn it, why couldn't that have been him? He was sure that he could have made it much more romantic than that idiot. He's not even interested in love. Barely knows what that is, but he always has to steal the spotlight, doesn't he? Thank goodness, Nami sighed, if they'd been any later, that fall would have killed her. He always did have good timing. Frankie laughed as Vivi continued to hang onto Luffy and buried her face into his chest as she cried out, Luffy, Pell, there isn't much time left before the squares blow up. Everyone is already down there. Blown up. Brook cried out. What's she talking about? Crocodile planted a bomb here that was set to go off, Robin answered, her face hidden by her long hair. It was his way of ending the war for good and so he could take the throne here. If that blast had gone off, everyone in the capital here would have been killed for sure. What? But what about his men? Frankie yelled out. You think that crocodile cared? Nami demanded hotly. He is just plain evil, Sanji snarled, looking at Vivi sadly, who continued to sob. My voice, she choked out, it can't be heard no matter how much I yell. At this rate, the country will fall apart. And she broke down completely here, sobbing her heart out on his shoulder. It was hard to watch, seeing how hopeless that Vivi saw everything. Nami remembered how Vivi lost it as she screamed her heart out at the top of the clock tower, screaming for the fighting to stop, but no one could hear her. Luffy then spoke, and they were all surprised by his sudden change in tone, like how one would speak to a small child who had a terrible nightmare. Despite all the noise from the fighting and explosions, they could hear his words as he smiled at her. Don't worry, Vivi, he reassured her, as long as we're here your voice will always be heard. She stared at him before she gave him a watery smile, tears falling faster than ever as she hung on tightly. Ah, Frankie sobbed, his hands over his heart. You're killing me here, bro. Who knew that he was so sentimental like this? He just speaks what pops his head. Robin smiled kindly as Usopp, Chopper, Brook and even Nami were all starting to get teary-eyed at his words. Or maybe even, from the heart. That dope, Nami said, half laughing, half crying as they headed to the foot of the palace, Pell landing and Luffy setting Vivi on her feet. Shifting the barrel on his back, Luffy stepped forward, spinning his arms around and limbering up, getting ready for a real fight. Best of luck, Luffy, Pell said, be careful. I ate tons of meat, bird guy. I'll be just fine. Luffy cried out, stretching his arms out as he glared up at Crocodile, who glared back down with a deep annoyance. They could all tell that though Crocodile still thought that he wasn't worth his time, his patience was running out and Luffy had made himself into a real pest. I won't lose to you, Luffy declared, looking ready to rocket himself up there, but then a familiar voice screamed behind him. It's Luffy. He's alive. Spinning around to look, they saw that their past selves were there. Chopper, Usopp, Sanji and even Eyelash were all there. The scream had come from Chopper, looking burnt and bruised, but still alive as he looked like he was out of his mind in happiness. Tony's here too, Vivi cried out as they saw him. What? Luffy, Luffy, past Usopp yelled. What the hell happened to you? Frankie yelled, seeing Usopp in a full body cast, everything but his fingers and part of his face heavily bandaged. I was hit in the head with a 4-ton bat, Usopp whimpered, remembering the pain. And also slammed into walls, blow up by exploding baseballs, oh, the agony. Way to take one for the team though, Zoro said and he blushed. Well of course, he cried out, that was nothing compared to the great Usopp. I've taken on far worse injuries than that. It's going to take more than that to kill me off. You're so cool, Usopp. Chopper cried out in amazement as his past self spotted Vivi and cried out happily that she was alright too. See, he's still alive. What did I tell you? I knew it all along. Memory, Usopp yelled, as if hoping that the whole world knew that he had been right, though he looked ready to cry here. Really? Both Choppers asked him eagerly. So then why did you keep talking about how that mole woman said that Luffy was dead? Sanji asked him. His past self seemed to agree as he stood next to Eyelash and reminded him, for someone who knew it all along you sure look surprised. Past Sanji was full of thick bruises, and he looked a great deal like how he looked when he got hurt in that avalanche on Drum. It's just good to know that I was right, Usopp said firmly. Yeah, Chopper agreed loudly. He got really mad at them when that mole said that Luffy was dead. Usopp refused to believe it. He kept saying that Luffy was going to become the king of the pirates. And when she laughed at that, he said that a real man never lets his friends' dreams be laughed at and he fought to make them pay for that. Did you really? Sanji said, looking up in new respect to Usopp, who turned red. Well, he said as they all looked to him. I just didn't want to admit it. I was just so angry. He didn't really notice it, but he seems to become unusually brave when it was for Luffy's sake. Not only here, but how he was willing to fight off all those bloodthirsty plants and giant insects just to try and get back to help him. He wasn't sure if that was the case, but he had come to see Luffy as like a brother to him as well, so of course he would be protective of him, right? Zoro clapped him on the shoulder. You glad that you got them to pay for what they said? He asked. Are you kidding? He yelled. They almost killed me. I was fighting for my life the whole time. Of course I'm glad I fought. They needed to be put in their place and I'm glad that I was the one to do it. With a little help from Chopper of course, he added and Chopper blushed red. Would you stop it? I can't take it, you idiot. Chopper cried out happily. Usopp. Sanji. You're alright. Vivi exclaimed in shock as past Sanji looked at her and gasped in concern. Oh, Vivi, what happened? He cried out. Are you alright? You look like you've been hurt. Out of all of us, she's the one to escape with the least injuries, Zoro muttered as his past self came running up, carrying Nami on his back. Both of them were a mess as well. Zoro looked like he had a bad fight with a cheese grater, his entire front was slashed and his shirt was soaked with dried blood. Nami was covered with cuts and puncture holes with her clothes ripped and torn, her leg probably in the worst shape as blood dripped from a large hole in her foot. As soon as she saw Usopp she jumped down and hit him over the head with her weapon. Nami too. And Mr. Bushido. Vivi muttered, gasping with her eyes wide, as if not really believing what she was seeing. Everyone is alive. What was that for? Brook asked Nami. Wasn't I put through enough that day without you hurting me? Usopp yelled at her, his past self nursing the swollen lump on his head. I asked you to make a weapon for me, but instead it did magic tricks. Like flowers and doves, she cried out. You turned me into a clown. Well, I didn't think that you were ever gonna really use it. Usopp yelled back. Their argument was now starting to look a lot like their past selves' version, only that as Nami told him off, Usopp just whimpered. Oh come on, you're standing up just fine. Past Zoro screamed angrily. You made me carry you the whole freaking way. Current Zoro yelled at her. Well, you still owed me a fortune here, didn't you? She yelled back. You're lucky that I didn't leave you where I found you. He hollered. Don't you yell at her. Sanji threatened. Enough. Robin called to them all, quieting them down. Did you all forget that this was 2 years ago? The four all glared at each other. Fine, Usopp said to Nami grudgingly, I'm sorry. I just thought that the way that Vivi talked about ending this whole thing without a war, I really wanted to believe that, so I guess that I didn't put as much time and effort into making a weapon if you weren't going to use it. I guess, Nami admitted, and I now officially claim you to be debt-free, Zoro. At least until you need to borrow more money again. Which I will never do, Zoro answered back as past Usopp asked about the powerful attack and she told him to be quiet as she turned back to Vivi, asking about the dust flying everywhere. What, you don't expect me to apologize to Mosshead, do you? Sanji demanded when Brook looked to him. I rather nail my tongue to the table at breakfast every morning, Zoro muttered darkly. And I rather swallow 1,000 needles, Sanji growled as well, the two glaring daggers at the other. I guess we can't hope for miracles every day, Nami sighed as past Sanji was now yelling at Zoro, explain yourself, idiot. How could you let Nami get injured like that? She's fine, let it go. Zoro snapped back as he tried to catch his breath. Yeah, my injuries were clearly a lot worse than hers, and she made me carry her ass all the way here. Zoro snarled, glaring at her. Don't compare me to your brute strength, she said innocently, and Sanji was so taken by that and he gripped his heart tightly and fell back, hearts in his eyes at that. Oh, Nami dear, you're so cute when you're manipulating people. You would know that better than anyone, wouldn't you? Usopp whispered softly. Listen, Chopper. Past Usopp gasped, do me a favor, bury my body out in the wastelands when I'm dead and gone. And it was hard to tell here, but he seemed to go into an actor's faint. No, Usopp, don't die, Past Chopper cried in worry. You all look like you've been through hell, Frankie said bluntly. Well, it certainly wasn't one of our better days, Nami sighed as she looked back to Luffy, whose face was once again hidden by shadow. I'm sorry, you guys, he said, and everyone looked to him, his arms stretched out, and looking ready to launch himself up to the palace. But the hung back long enough to talk to them. There was shame and embarrassment in his voice as he finished. I know I lost to him once already. This time, I'm gonna win. The rest is up to you. Yeah, we were all surprised to hear he lost, but we were just glad to know that he was alive, Usopp whispered in relief. I was so happy that he was okay that I didn't care if he lost, Chopper said at once, I was so scared. The others didn't seem to be upset with the fact that he lost, they were all smiling confidently at him. So get going already, Past Zoro said with a smirk, with Nami and Sanji smiling just as widely as he was. If you can't beat this guy, Memory, Usopp said loudly, then I don't know anybody who can. Luffy reassured them all, I'm gonna put an end to this. For good. Yeah, they all cheered him on, looking ready to take on the world despite all their injuries as Vivi started crying again. Thank you, she gasped, rubbing at her eyes, after all that's happened, all of you are still with me. Even Pell was looking at them all with a gentle look in his eyes, as if he couldn't agree more. Even he was looking like he believed that Luffy could take him out. Finally, with one last grin at them all, Luffy rocketed himself up, hurtling himself through the air at him, screaming the whole way. Try all you want, Crocodile called. Now that the shock of seeing him alive was over, he was back to confident. But no matter how many times you swing, you'll never hit me. I guess you didn't get enough the first time, huh? Wait, he's right, Nami gasped, he's just going to keep missing. No, not this time, Robin answered as Crocodile stood still, waiting for the attack. But this time, when he was starting to cause his head to dissolve into sand, Luffy threw a punch, and to most of their amazement, he was able to strike him this time. He had hit him so hard that he was knocked right off the wall. He did it, Chopper screamed out in wonder. But how? Nami cried as Usopp's jaw dropped. Robin just smiled a little wider. Blood was dripping from the side of Crocodile's mouth and his eyes were wide with shock as he was sent flying back, landing painfully in the dirt just as Luffy skidded on his own landing. Once they landed next to him, they realized that they weren't alone. There were several guards, either dead or out cold on the ground. Robin was also there, but was standing next to a man who was actually nailed to the wall. 2 long spikes were shoved right through his arms and his blood was dripping down around them as he stared ahead at the fight. He had a wrinkled face, a tied-off beard with long, curly hair, and he was dressed in a simple yet regal robe, and there was something about his large kind eyes that reminded them all of Vivi. "Who's that?" Brooke called. Looking to him, "He looks important." "That would be Cobra," Robin answered, looking at her past self with sadness. "Vivi's father. Her old man." Frankie cried out in surprise, "So that makes him the king." "That's right," she answered, looking back just in time to see Crocodile getting up, but Luffy was far from done. He had stretched out his arms once again to grab his shoulders, holding him in place as his legs began to spin wildly like pinwheels, but then he began to spin his whole body around so that he was nothing but a blur. "Gum gum, how can he hit me?" Crocodile gasped as Luffy came spinning towards him. "Buzzsaw, go for it," Usopp screamed out, and with a great headbutt that would have cracked a normal person's skull right in two, Crocodile's eyes rolled into the back of his head as he went flying back fell to the ground. "How is he doing it?" Sanji called. "He couldn't even hit him before. Now he's just wailing on him like he's an amateur." "I wouldn't bet on that," Robin answered as Cobra was also gaping at what he saw, his eyes white as coins. It's been a long time since he was hit, and so Crocodile didn't expect to be hit here. He was thrown off his game for a moment, but he's far from finished. Though she knew her past self agreed, she looked to see that she was smiling slightly. Once again, amazed at this kid's tenacity. Luffy was gasping for breath again. Though he had only started, he was already starting to get tired thanks to that wound. Though he had recovered enough that it seemed to have closed over, the repair was only temporary, and if he wasn't careful, they all knew that it was going to open up again. The sounds of the battle below them seemed to fade, for here, only this battle seemed to matter. But how? Zoro asked before he noticed the drops of water falling from Luffy's hand. "What did that? Water?" Nami whispered before her eyes widened in understanding. "Get up," Luffy yelled, at Crocodile. "I figured something out when some of my Yuba water dropped on your hand. Once you touch water, you can't turn into sand anymore." "Wait, really?" Chopper cried in shock. "That was all it took?" Sanji asked exasperatedly, "Get him wet." Nami slapped herself in the head at this. "Of course, why didn't I think of it? Water hardens sand. Stupid. I should have been able to figure that out from the start." Luffy then took the hose connected to the water barrel on his back and splashed some onto his arm as he spoke. "You took away all the rain because you're afraid of water, didn't you?" He grinned as he held up his soaked hand. "I know how to defeat you, Crocodile. Our real fight is starting now." "Wow, and here I thought that Crocodile took away the rain to drive the people insane," Zoro said. "That was part of it," Robin answered, "but it was also because it is his weakness. He took the rain away so that there was an even less chance of someone figuring it out. And he was able to think of this with a giant hole in his gut." Usopp cried out. "Though he's not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer, he is a genius when it comes to fighting," Sanji said, suddenly remembering when Luffy grabbed hold of Crocodile's arm and he cried out in pain. "Yes, it is ingenious if you think about it," Robin chuckled. "Get up," Luffy yelled again more fiercely. "It's time to fight. Now Crocodile." Finally, Crocodile chuckled to himself as he slowly sat up. By the time he was in a sitting position, it had turned into a full laugh as Robin and Cobra watched on. "Why is he laughing?" Chopper asked worriedly. "Yeah, Luffy just decked him." Usopp added angrily. "It's not a funny laugh," Robin said, as Luffy pulled off his hat and threw it out of harm's way so that he wouldn't have to worry about it getting harmed in the battle, but more one of resentful amusement. "He's laughing at Luffy because he thinks he can beat him with water alone." "That's not the case." Confirming her words, Crocodile asked in great amusement, "Come on. You think you can defeat me?" "Sure do," Luffy answered bluntly. "Now that I've figured out how to stop you from turning into sand." "I'll admit I'm impressed you figured it out," Crocodile said, holding up his hand casually, as if discussing the matter at the dinner table, especially since you were about to die. "But I hope you realize that something like that isn't enough to make this an even fight. I am one of the 7 warlords of the sea. So what if you're one of the 7 dumb warlords?" Luffy exclaimed. "Guess that makes me the 8th warlord." Zoro actually burst out laughing at how dumb that sounded as everyone else let that sink in, a very awkward silence in both memory and out. "He didn't just say that, did he?" Usopp whispered with a blank expression. "He did," Robin answered, also chuckling a little at that. "He's such an idiot," Nami said, shaking her head at that. Out of everything he could have said, he chose that. "Hey, what can you do?" Frankie said, smirking. "Really, who is that guy?" Cobra asked Robin as they moved back closer to the palace walls so that they could get a better look at the whole thing. "He's a pirate," Memory Robin answered coolly as he looked to her. "I'm surprised you haven't heard of him yet. He's helped your darling Princess Vivi escape from death a few times now." "So then he asked looking back at him with new interest, is the one responsible for bringing Vivi back." "What am I?" Sanji demanded, chopped liver. Past Robin didn't answer him as she watched, her thumb brought up to her smile as if she was really enjoying seeing Luffy pound Crocodile. "Gum gum, pistol." Luffy yelled that he attempted to punch Crocodile once again, but Crocodile easily moved his head just a little so that Luffy missed him completely. If I dodge it, then it's no use, he said as he grabbed hold of the arm that rocketed by his head. My hand can still absorb any fluid on you. Oh no, Usopp cried out, grabbing his hair in panic again. I forgot about that. He wasn't the only one. Luffy gritted his teeth in anger as Crocodile dried up all the water in his arm, dying so that it looked like it was a dried up fruit. Oh, I hurt just looking. Brook cried out, hugging his body, though I don't think I could get any more dried up, yo-ho-ho-ho. Aw crap, forgot about that trick. Luffy yelled as he ran forward to kick him and get him to let go, but he turned to sand before Luffy could reach him. However, he was able to free his arm as he jumped out of the way and quickly sucked as much water as he could from the barrel so that his arm was rehydrated. There ya go. Frankie applauded, keep it up. Luffy smirked as he landed behind him, turning back to fight. Alright, not bad, he admitted, reaching for the hose and squirted water over his head and soaking himself. Remember how you told me how devil fruit powers get stronger? He threw another gum pistol at him, however, when he pulled at his arm, he let it vibrate like how one would when they placed a guitar string. So then it snapped like a rubber band, making it look like there were dozens of punches flying at him, impossible to know where it would land. Crocodile was taken by complete surprise as Luffy finished, shotgun. Wow, he learned a lot from just that one loss, cried Brook in amazement. They do say that you learn more from defeat than victory, Zoro stated, knowing that humbling feeling all too well. So long as you survive, you can become much stronger than before. Crocodile was forced to jump out of the way at the last second, sending another desert spotter right at him. Luffy realized this and moved, missing it by just a hair. Like before, there was now a deep ravine in the palace yawn, smashing right into the wall and blew it away in an explosion. Man, this fight is getting super dangerous. Frankie cried out. That's because Luffy is dangerously close to pushing Crocodile over the edge, Robin answered knowingly. Any farther and he's going to snap. Luffy was breathing deeply as he looked to the damage, but was still going for it. He turned and looked ready to throw another pistol attack right at him. You just keep using the same move against me. Do you want to win? Crocodile asked in a bored voice, looking ready to dodge again. Why don't you try something new? Sanji called. As if he heard him, Luffy's fist stopped just before he reached Crocodile, but when his arm retracted like the rubber band, he used it to right out and appear right in front of him and Crocodile was caught off guard. The stunned look on his face was just perfect as Luffy cried out, yeah. And I'm going to. Just before he threw another punch right in the face, sending him back. Yeah, Chopper screamed in joy, he did it. Didn't see that coming, Sanji stated. One of his greatest advantages is surprise, Zoro added, wishing that he had some popcorn to watch this as well. That's been my plan from the beginning, Luffy declared as he still hung in the air, ripping the barrel right off his back and threw it, trying to get him wet. Of course your plan was obvious. Crocodile shouted out, his hand calling the wind. Sables. No. Usopp screamed, Luffy needed that water to stand a chance. Both Luffy and the barrel were knocked right in the air, spinning around in the twister so that they were all turned around and dizzy by the time that they were able to get their senses together to figure out where they were. Luffy was dangerously close to being knocked right over the ledge, but managed, not only to land safely on the wall, but to also recover the barrel. Crocodile laughed mockingly. You're struggling so hard, Straw Hat Luffy. You can't do anything at all without that barrel of yours, can you? He demanded smugly, this isn't any different from my first fight against you after all. Shut up jerk, Chopper yelled in warning. Luffy's gonna take you out with, or without, it. But Luffy was standing up, holding the barrel as he nodded. Yeah, you're right Crocodile, he said as he seemed to get a strange look in his eyes. He's got that look again. Nami cried out, knowing that whatever he was planning couldn't be a good thing. What's he thinking of now? Sanji asked, almost afraid of what he was going to see. It isn't any different like this, Luffy went on and suddenly, he ripped off the very top of the barrel and began drinking the entire thing. Robin suddenly burst out laughing as she remembered this the first time, but seeing the look on Crocodile's face was priceless. It changed from its usual smugness, to confusion, and finally to disbelief. He wasn't the only one, Cobra was gapping as past Robin looked like she was about to burst out laughing as well. The Straw Hats all stared at this incredulity, truly never seeing anything like this. Luffy's stomach was now full of water so that he looked like a melon. Robin was now calming down, as Sanji and Zoro both cried out at the same time, what the hell? That's got to be the stupidest thing I've seen yet, Frankie whispered, several large sweat drops above his head. How about this? Luffy yelled confidently as he slammed the barrel onto the ground so that the almost empty barrel shattered. Now I'm not the same as I was huh? I don't think that's what he meant, Luffy, Usopp whispered as Chopper's jaw dropped open in shock. You gotta be kidding me. Crocodile yelled at him, water Luffy, declared, patting his belly. But then, the wound that Crocodile gave Luffy before, opened enough so that water came out of his front and back. Oh no, he screamed out in panic, a leak. He can't be serious, Zoro said as Robin was actually wiping tears of laughter from her eyes and Brook was now laughing here. But Chopper was biting down on his hooves in a nervous way as he thought of how much worse he was making that wound. Everyone else was looking embarrassed as they looked on, but they had to admit that it was funny as hell. Though the leak was stopped, he seemed to be fighting back a burp, and the water spilling from his mouth. With a great swallow he said, "Guess I shouldn't have drunk that much water." Chopper really did fall over at that as some of the Straw Hats quirked smiles as Memory Robin lost it completely and burst out laughing here, much like current Robin did before. It was very strange hearing Robin laugh like that, before they realized that they rarely heard her laugh like that, at least here anyway. But Crocodile seemed to lose all tolerance as he turned and bellowed at Luffy, "Damn it. Stop your messing around." Zoro was taken aback by that. Crocodile was attacked in blind anger. He formed a kind of dust storm where his legs had been and began flying at him, but Luffy pumped up water from his throat and into his mouth before he spit out a giant water bubble at him, who had skidded to a stop at once. But it was too late, he was completely soaked through by the time the water hit him. "He's spitting at him," Brook called out. "Disgusting," Nami shivered. "Only Luffy can think of something this stupid." Sanji sighed as Zoro fully understood why Crocodile seemed to lose it. It was like Luffy wasn't taking this whole fight seriously. But Luffy stretched his arms high. "Who said I was messing around?" he demanded with a scream. Crocodile suddenly frozen as Luffy brought his arms directly behind him. "I'm always serious. Now let me show you. Now gum gum, bazooka." And here he slammed his fists right in Crocodile's stomach and sent him back so hard that he was spitting up blood. With force so great, they could almost feel it themselves as Crocodile was sent flying back right into a large stone structure, reducing it to rubble. "Oh, that had to hurt," Usopp gasped, his eyes wide as some of the others cheered out, screaming in joy here. "How was that?" Luffy asked as he wiped his mouth. "Sand Croc. Awesome," Chopper called. "Maybe it was in a weird way, but hey, it got the job done." Cobra gaped at him, but Memory Robin's face showed no emotion. That's amazing," Cobra gasped. "He beat Crocodile. That kid is weird, but incredible." "I think that's Luffy in the nutshell," Sanji said as past Robin looked to Cobra. "There's no time now for all this admiration," she said, the laughter now completely gone and now all business, "we have other things to do." She then used her powers to grow arms on the wall and bluntly pull out the spokes that held him there. He screamed in pain as he fell to his knees, blood dripping from his arms as she told him to get up and that he was going to show her the way to the poneglyph. "Dang girl," Frankie said nervously. "I think I felt the temperature drop a little just from you saying that." Robin sighed, not proud of her past actions here, but knew that there wasn't anything she could do about it here. She wanted to hurry here because she wanted to leave before the bomb went off. She wanted to find the poneglyph and see what it said before she left Crocodile for good. "But, what are you planning to do?" Cobra demanded back as he struggled to get up. "How could looking at possibly help you?" Rather than answer his question, she had another arm grown from his back and hold him down as he gasped in pain. "Just stop asking questions," she said in a dull tone, restraining him. "All you have to do is show me where it is." Nami looked to her sadly, not liking seeing Robin acting so cold like this. But she wasn't the only one here. Past Robin must have felt Luffy's eyes on her as she turned and looked back up to see that he was staring at her with a blank face. The two shared a long hard look at the other, as if reaching some sort of understanding. Though the current Robin couldn't be sure, she was sure that they were both thinking of when she had helped him just hours ago. "Your luck's beginning to run out," she finally said to Luffy. "You certainly did try. But there's not much time left." The grins on the current Straw Hats' faces disappeared, not liking at how she put that. "I forgot about the bomb," Nami cried out, looking back at the clock to see that they now had less than 10 minutes left before 4:30. "Yes, but that's not what I was talking about," Robin answered as there was a bang from the rubble and Crocodile was up on his feet. He glared at Robin and ordered, "You should get going now, Nico Robin. Unless you want to be dried up along with this brat. Go now, I'm done with playing games." "I guess that he's really angry now?" Nami asked nervously. "Oh yes," she nodded as Cobra's eyes widened at Robin's name. Past Robin, however, didn't seem concerned at the threat. After a few seconds of silence, she nodded her head once, and did what he said as she took Cobra with her and left. Which left only Luffy and Crocodile in a stare down. "Okay, I'm not liking this," Usopp gulped. "My Usopp radar is going off." "Something's really wrong here." "Usopp radar?" Zoro asked skeptically. "It means that my own instincts are telling me something wrong," he yelled, pointing wildly at Crocodile. He said that he was going to suck him dry. "Do we really need to know what happens here?" "I've seen this technique only once before," Robin informed them, "and I can tell you that Luffy better think fast if he doesn't want to die." "Wait, it's that bad?" Brook cried out. "Whether we like it or not, we're about to find out," Zoro said, unable to stop the feeling of uneasiness in the pit of his stomach as Crocodile put his hand to the ground. IG was here. They had a very bad idea to what he was about to do now. "Listen up, Straw Hat. I'm gonna destroy every last rock on this ground," Crocodile stated, his face looking dangerously sinister, "and you along with them." Luffy gave a sharp intact of breath, and some of them shouted in shock at what they saw. Crocodile was sucking the very life out of the ground. All the grass is dying. Usopp screamed as Luffy yelled in shock as the palm trees crumbled away to dust. Ground secco. Crocodile shouted as everything collapsed and died, turning to sand and cracking apart as Luffy jumped back away, but there was a large ravine that opened up beneath his feet and he fell, just barely holding on. This is bad. You mean to tell me that everything touching the ground is dead? Sanji cried out. That ability is scary. Chopper screamed in fear as Luffy was hanging upside down, his feet stretched across the gorge, like doing a crazy version of the splits. Luffy pumped more water into his throat and shot several more bubbles of water at him, but Crocodile stopped his progress of drying the ground long enough to dry the bubbles instantly as soon as they touched. His hand sucked it up. Luffy cried out, his eyes wide. Great, now what? Frankie cried out. Water's this guy's weak point, but even knowing that he can still suck it all up so it doesn't matter. You actually thought you could kill my powers, didn't you, Water Luffy? Crocodile asked almost in a mocking, sarcastic way as Luffy was able to pull himself back up. That was a very foolish mistake to make. The true power of sand is drying things out, he finished as he put his hand back to the ground. My right hand can suck out the life out of anything by turning it to dust. And once again the ground's once green lawn had turned to sand, the stone around them was crumbling away to dust. Its power is limitless. Luffy, Sanji yelled, get off the ground. How's he supposed to do that? Nami yelled, unless he suddenly sprouts wings and flies. He wasn't exaggerating. Luffy exclaimed in shock as the statue of the jackal, next to the front doors fell, even the statues are crumbling. The statue fell and crumbled away to nothing as he stepped back, staring around in horror. Everything is just dying. He suddenly cried out in pain as he held up a foot to see that even his sandals had disintegrated to powder. Crocodile was smiling, his face overshadowed with insanity. Everything connected to the ground is done for. Including you. Luffy's eyes widened and he was actually shaking, not that any of them blamed him for that. Chopper and Usopp had both jumped up onto Frankie's shoulders, half expecting them to dry up as well. Would you all shut up? Zoro called as they hollered in fear and shock. Ground death. Crocodile yelled in a dark voice that seemed to echo around them. Everything exploded around them and turned to sand, the ground shaking as if in an earthquake. The last thing they saw before the cloud of earth came up and blocked their view, was Luffy grabbing his hat and went running for the doors of the palace. They stood there in shock, waiting for it to hurry up and clear. Luffy, Usopp called, please let us know that you're alright. He's alright. Brook called, hearing Luffy's gasps of breath somewhere above them. I can hear him. Here, Chopper asked, but the dust was just starting to clear and they looked up in surprise. There wasn't anything left of the place, that was now no different than the desert they had spent days marching across. But to their greatest relief, Luffy has jumped up to hang onto the palace wall above them, hanging there out of harm's way and overlooking everything. Frankie wiped some sweat from his brow. Damn, he had me scared out of my mind here. Luffy was now trying to pull himself back up, struggling a little with his budging, water-filled belly. Wait, Zoro called, where'd that sand croc disappear now? They looked around and realized that he was right, Crocodile just vanished. But damn, does he know how to leave a mess or what? Sanji asked darkly, looking at the dead land around here. But then they heard Luffy's cry of shock and they turned at once to see, to their horror, that Crocodile was now on top of the building, grinning evilly, as he dragged Luffy by his neck. No, Nami screamed, knowing that this could only end one way. Struggling to get free, Luffy fought to pull Crocodile's hand off him. I'm quite tired of wasting my time with you, Crocodile said, looking a great deal to how he was dangling Vivi over the edge before. Let him go, you bastard. Usopp screamed. He's gonna dry Luffy-san up. Brook screamed, his bony hands grabbing his face in fear. With one last-ditch effort to escape, Luffy shot several more water bubbles up at him, but all Crocodile had to do was move his head so that the water shot past him, hovering in the air far above their heads. It's far too late. No, Sanji yelled, Nami closing her eyes at that. Missed me, Crocodile said softly as he slowly dried Luffy. Luffy was gasping in pain as his body slowly began to dry up and mummify. Chopper had to hide his face in Frankie's shirt as Usopp held just watching. The straw hat fell from Luffy's withered hand, blowing away on the wind like a kite down towards the fighting below them as his body dried and withered so that he looked as if he was made of paper. You have lost to me, 2 times now, Straw Hat Luffy, Crocodile laughed, his face full of sick humor as he held him up by his neck, standing over the edge as Luffy's feeble body gasped there weakly. This is a good way to die. He lost, twice. Usopp croaked out, unable to believe what he was seeing. So that's what happened, Robin whispered to herself. While she knew that Luffy had to have lost this time round, she didn't think that it was this serious. The memory around them was slipping in and out of focus once again as Crocodile's voice went on. Within 6 minutes, this yard will be blown up along with the square. I'd stay, but I'm in a hurry. He then let go of Luffy's body, that was fluttering to the ground like an old newspaper would in the wind before he landing on the sand below, not moving. You just wait right there, okay? And then you can celebrate the new king of the sand country. And with one final grin, Crocodile left the palace in a stream of sand and headed west. How the hell did he survive that? Nami demanded as Chopper went running over to Luffy's dried up body. I mean, if Luffy wasn't so stubborn, he'd die both times, Sanji said, calming down a little. Chopper seemed to be almost crying at his helplessness here. He just couldn't seem to stand watching this and not be able to do anything to help. I don't get it, Usopp cried out, now completely lost. What happened here? How was he able to? But as he trailed off, a shadow passed above them and they looked up. The water bubbles that he showed before were falling hard and fast like giant raindrops. Don't tell me, Robin stated, a smile slowly coming back to her face. She was right, the water fell right on top of him, and his dried body soaked it up like a sponge. You've got to be kidding me. Nami cried, her jaw falling open as Frankie let out a bark of laughter and Brook was jumping up and down in joy. Amazing, who would have seen that coming? He cried out. With a shuddering gasp, Luffy sat upright, gasping that he thought for sure that he was going to die. You almost did, Chopper yelled furiously, wanting to knock him upside the head for scaring him like that. God, that was way too close, Usopp moaned out, not sure how much more he could take here. That bastard, he took off, Luffy growled, getting viciously to his feet and glaring in the direction that Crocodile took off in. I think he flew off in the direction, he growled to himself, gritting his teeth together and declaring, he won't get away with this. Damn him, Luffy forced his wounded body to get up and gave chase, not stopping as he kept running as fast as he could. They were all struggling to keep up as they ran through the chaos in the streets, Luffy ignoring them all as he just kept going straight west. Man, that was too close for comfort if you ask me, Frankie said. He barely escaped death twice here, I don't know how much more can happen. Guy's got more lives than a cat, Sanji stated, shaking his head. He's going to keep going until Crocodile's beaten or he's dead, Zoro said, also grinding his own teeth together. This guy really was no joke. He knew that he lost once, but twice. Well, Robin offered, they do say that 3 times the charm. So he did face him again. Brook called in amazement. And he won that time, didn't he? Chopper asked firmly and she nodded. I saw the whole thing, she said, her hand going to her chest where she could still just make out the feeling of the hook in her chest. She understood Luffy's pain better than anyone here when he was impaled back at Rainbase. But Luffy's not healed here though, is he? Usopp asked as Luffy ducked underneath a rebel who spotted him and just kept going, dodging a few swords that were aimed for him as the royals attacked on the other side. No, Chopper said, his determination slowly fading at that. He was in really bad shape when we found him. He had a really high fever and was sleeping for 3 whole days. 3 days? Brook cried out, that sounds serious. He's going to get himself killed one of these days if he keeps pushing himself like that, Nami whispered fearfully, not liking this at all. Hey, I know that young lady. Brook suddenly said and they looked to see what he was looking at and they stared. On the ground was a familiar young woman, looking as though she was in the wrong end of a fight. She wasn't the only one, but there was also about 3 dozen unconscious Marines behind her, each one looking as if they had been choked out. What? Tashigi-san, Sanji cried out in concern as he ran over to her. What kind of heartless bastard would do this to a woman? He demanded as Luffy stopped in front of her. Sorry, Robin said regretfully. That was me. Sanji stopped dead, feeling completely lost for words. It's all right, she smiled as he gaped like a fish out of water at the thought of him unknowingly insulting a woman. I was having Cobra led me to the poneglyph, and they got in my way. I was in a hurry and they weren't helping. I didn't kill any of them, but I had to make sure that they wouldn't continue to come after me. Grasping her sword, Tashigi looked up when she sensed that she wasn't alone anymore. Crocodile, Luffy snapped at her. Startled, she held up the sword and pointed it at him, Straw Hat. It was rather tense as Luffy demanded to know where Crocodile went. She stared at him long and hard, as if trying to figure out any trace of betrayal here. Come on, Zoro hissed. Did she honestly think that all pirates were so evil that she was willing to waste time like this? If she didn't know where he went then just tell him, if she did, for the love of all that's good, then spit it out. The war around them was getting louder and the battle was becoming more bloodthirsty as Luffy lost his patience and yelled out, tell me right now. Which way did he go? Luffy. Sanji yelled out furiously, don't yell at a lady. Now's not the time, eyebrows, Zoro growled out. We're short on time here. Manners is the least of our worries. Like that's an excuse to yell at a woman like that. Sanji hissed back, fire in his eyes. But Tashigi seemed to be struggling within herself for a moment, wondering what she should do. Finally, she let the sword fall from her hand and slowly pointed down a pathway. Towards the temple, she said softly. That way, that direction, he repeated, looking down the road, thank you. And he ran off without a glance back. The Marines helped him. Frankie called in surprise. He wasn't the only one, Nami gasped out as they started running again. As soon as they heard about the bomb, they decided that their fight with us wasn't important anymore. They even helped us out here. Giving us directions, fighting off the Baroque Works billions who were after us. Probably one of the only few times that the Marines helped us out, Zoro stated. I have to admit that it was a nice change, Usopp struggled for breath. Amazing. Brooke said happily, you turned even Marines to allies here. Only temporary, Nami stated, they turned back to trying to capture us once they had Crocodile and things calmed down. There's gratitude for ya, Usopp groaned out bitterly as they headed even farther west. The farther that they ran, the sounds of the fighting seemed to become less and soon they came to a large temple on the far side of the city. It truly was a grand thing, looking hundreds of years old and full of decorative writings and elaborate statues. What is this place? Chopper called out, looking at the tall pillars that they ran past. This temple is where the royals of Alabasta are buried, Robin said, breathing hard from the run. It was here that the poneglyph was hidden through a secret passageway. So this was where you can find out about the Pluton, Frankie said, almost to himself as Nami cried out in worry at Luffy. He was staggering as he ran, his hand over the wound that Crocodile gave him, and they saw that it had opened up again. Chopper freaked out as Luffy finally fell and went running right against a wall of a building, sliding down it and leaving blood splattered where he fell. That doesn't look good, Sanji said at once. Of course it's not good. Chopper screamed at him, pointing a shaking hoof at Luffy, he's losing so much blood. He could bleed to death in no time at all if we don't do something about that injury. Luffy was still struggling to get back to running, but the memory around them was blacking out and blurry so that they couldn't see straight anymore. Luffy was losing the fight to stay awake, muttering to himself that he should lie down for a moment, but his body answered that for him and he collapsed on the grass just outside the temple and the memory disappeared. I feel sick just watching, Usopp cried out, looking ready to run and hide as they looked around the field again. It turned out that they hadn't wandered as far as they had thought they did from Ace's and Whitebeard's graves. They could still just make them out in the distance and wordlessly they started making their way back to it. But before they got too far, they were back in the memory. It was just as how they left it. The battle was still waging on in the distance, and Usopp looked up to see a faint tower of red smoke high above the city. Before he could point it out to them, Luffy was awake and had pushed himself into a sitting position. Ah, I slept good, he said to himself, a hand on his head as if to touch his hat. Wait, he said as if trying to remember what was going on. That's right, I couldn't move all of a sudden. So I decided to risk it and take a nap right here since there was really no other choice. Of course there wasn't. Chopper yelled at him, what did you think? Yeah, and I feel better now, so, Luffy finished as he punched his fist into his hand and he got right back up to his feet as if nothing interrupted him and charged ahead. Alright, now it's time for me to beat up Crocodile. He's got such a one-track mind, Sanji sighed tiredly as he turned and went running once again, running through the place and looking ready to head right into the temple when he noticed something. Just outside the temple there was a set of stairs heading deep into the earth. I can only assume that's the passage you were talking about. Nami asked Robin as she nodded. Luffy noticed it as well, muttering to himself quietly as he made a 180 and bolted straight for the darkness. It was a long set of stairs that seemed to head into the bowels of the earth, yet still he ran, but as he did the entire place seemed to be falling apart. Small bits of rock was falling on top of them and the entrance behind them seemed to have caved in. What's going on here? Nami cried in confusion. Cobra, Robin answered as Luffy kept calling for Crocodile, looking all over for him. All three of us were already down here. I heard him explain to Crocodile that this place was set up should something like this happen. Cobra triggered a destruction mechanism in the grave to keep the secret safe. But that means that he would have died too. Usopp yelled. Yes, he knew that, Robin answered, he was willing to make that sacrifice if he could take Crocodile down with him. But with his ability, Crocodile could have survived through it all. Damn, no matter what you throw at him, it's like he's got an answer for everything. Sanji yelled as they finally reached the bottom of the stairs and saw that the room was in shambles, and only continuing to collapse around them. Pillars and pieces of the ceiling were in front of him, blocking the way. They don't have a lot of time here. Usopp called anxiously, this place only has a few minutes. If even that much. Using his powers, Luffy was able to jump and swing through it all, still searching for Crocodile as they merely passed right through all the stone. But just as Luffy was looking ready to scream out in frustration, they heard it, Crocodile's insane laughter was coming from behind one of the stone walls. Grinning, Luffy yelled out, found you. And then went punching right through the wall. Going through as well, they were in the large room, looking just as messed up as the rest of the tomb. They could see the poneglyph, identical to the one they saw underneath the desert, standing tall. Through the smoke of the destroyed wall, Luffy stepped through, looking more tired than ever and covered in blood. But there was a fierce determination set on his face as he stepped through the hole in the wall, glaring at Crocodile. Crocodile was staring at him in shock, not believing what he was seeing. There was no longer any smugness, boredom, disappointment, or even confidence on his face. For the first time since Rainbase when he discovered that Luffy was still alive, there was real fear here. I'd kill to know what was going through his head here, Usopp whispered, gulping here, now really scared at what he was seeing here. But his stunned expression was quickly replaced however by anger. So it's you, he yelled, and now he truly sounded infuriated here. You can't get away. Luffy yelled fiercely, you're mine. Never thought I'd almost feel sorry for Crocodile, Frankie whispered softly. Almost. He's in for a world of hurt here. Nami cried. Take him out, Luffy. How are you still alive? Crocodile demanded loudly, his voice echoing off the stone walls. No matter how many times I kill you, you just keep coming back for more. Well, answer me, brat. This is what happens when you don't take the time to make sure you finish the job, Zoro said. If you only maim someone with the attack, they have a nasty habit of coming back and making you regret it. Up till now, Crocodile never took him seriously, Robin answered. He just thought he was some stupid, wild kid. And it cost him big time, Sanji said, puffing harder than ever on the cigarette, trying to remind himself not to overdo it until he got a new box. How'd he do it? How'd he live and come here? Croaked a voice, and they finally looked around to see that Cobra was there as well, leaning up against the wall and staring at Luffy like he was a ghost. Who is this boy? They also heard a soft groan behind them, and when Nami looked, she screamed out, Robin. Memory Robin was lying face forward on the floor, a deep wound in her own chest, much like the one that Luffy had before, though maybe not as serious as his had been. Groaning a little, she looked up, her glassy eyes spotting Luffy. It's Straw Hat. Robin-chan, what happened to you? Sanji demanded, horrified to see one of the women he loved so dearly in such a terrible state. Crocodile, was all she answered, and Sanji burst into flames, the rest of them jumping away from him as he roared out how he was going to kill him if he ever got hold of him. How dare that shitty bastard harm a lady here? He's dead. I'm gonna knock it off. Nami yelled. Crocodile got his due now. What's going to happen here? Take him out, Luffy. Chopper cried out. Tell me, just how many times do you have to die? Crocodile demanded, holding up his hook threateningly. There's something you still need to return, Crocodile, Luffy declared at once, surprising them by how calm he sounded here. And I came here to get it back. Get what back? Chopper asked in confusion. Crocodile looked just as confused and asked, with a rather hysterical laugh, what is this thing I took? He held up his hand. Is it money? He held up his hook. Is it fame? Or people's trust? Their lives? Is it rain? He laughed louder than ever, truly sounding insane, but loving every moment of it as he admitted for them all to hear. I have taken all those things. So which is it you want me to give back, Straw Hat? Stepping forward, Luffy answered only 2 words. This country. Country. Sanji repeated, all of them aside from Robin not understanding what he was talking about. Robin however did, and she smiled a little sadly at this. The country. Really, you should know better than that right now. I have no intention of giving up this country. Crocodile laughed, and Nami's breath was caught in her chest. Those words sounded very like how Arlong declared that she was part of his crew and he wasn't going to let her go. Why would I when I'm gonna become its next king before long? Crocodile finished. Luffy's eyes narrowed dangerously, they could all feel the hatred in his tone despite the fact that he was still calm. We came here to this island to save Vivi's country. But then, when we got here it was gone, he answered slowly, as if remembering something painful before he finally yelled, pointing an accusing finger at him, you stole her country. Stole her. Usopp repeated in a whisper as the others slowly understood what he was getting at. Crocodile only scowled at him as Luffy shouted out, this is her country and I'm here to get it back from you. I will defeat you and take this country out of your evil hands. His eyes became enraged once again as he screamed out loudly, and then, Vivi will SMLIE again. Those words had a powerful impact on them all. When they thought it all over, they realized that he was right. This kingdom of the sand was already gone. It was gone before they got back here. It wasn't the same country that Vivi knew, just a dead land that Crocodile was sucking dry. You mean, he's doing all this just to help Vivi-san? Brook said softly. To him, Alabasta is a nameless, faceless thing, Robin answered softly, but Vivi's his friend. So long as she keep fighting, he wants to help her. He's always been like this. It's how he sees the world. His code of action is very simple, Zoro added softly. Luffy did help to save countless people in the past, including entire countries and islands, however, that seemed to be more of a byproduct of just trying to save one person. You're my friend, and I want to help you. Frankie couldn't contain it as he broke down with Brook by his side. That's sweet and everything, Nami cried out, but how's he going to fight him here? He used the last of the water. Once the shock had worn off, Crocodile seemed to realize this fact as well. Threaten me as much as you like. He smirked as he held up his hook, but without any water, you're nothing. Ignoring his words, Luffy charged once again, but to their amazement, when he kicked Crocodile right in the face, he didn't turn to sand and was sent back so hard that his head went smashing right into the wall. He did hit him. Chopper cried out. But how? He doesn't have any water. Usopp yelled, not understanding at all. That's because he has something that works just as well as water, Robin answered as some of the crew slowly realized what she was saying. Just then, Crocodile slowly sat up and glared at Luffy, his expression holding nothing but shock before his eyes widened. Luffy looked ready for the next round as he cracked his knuckles. Then he gave a loud yell as he threw his arm back and slammed his fist so hard into Crocodile's face that he was sent flying black into the wall once again, bleeding heavily. But before some of the slower members could ask the question, Crocodile did it for them. Slowly sitting back up, he asked with his voice shaking with anger, I see. You're using your blood. His blood. Usopp cried out, staring at Luffy to see that his fists were, indeed, covered with blood. Wicked, Frankie whispered. Now that's, wow. Took the words out of my mouth, Sanji answered. That's idiot, Nami whispered, what's he thinking? Clever, Crocodile admitted. Blood can harden sand too, can't it? Luffy said neutrally, holding up a bloody fist. They say you gotta put your sweat, blood, and tears into anything, Zoro stated, and Chopper looked close to freaking out again. He's done some stupid, crazy things before, Chopper cried out, but this has to be one of the craziest. If he's not careful. Too late now, Brook called as Crocodile forced himself back to his feet. First Rain Base, and then the Royal Palace, he laughed madly, and now, this underground temple. Luffy just looked on at him, wondering just what he was trying to say here. You should be rewarded for your insistence on challenging me, Crocodile went on. Even though I put you through hell twice now, you keep coming back. He never did know when to admit defeat, Sanji stated as Luffy went for another attack, forcing Crocodile to jump out of the way so that Luffy went slamming through the wall this time. As they watched, Crocodile reached for his hook and pulled off the golden part to reveal that there was another hook just underneath it. Only this one seemed to be made of iron and was embedded with large holes with a slight pink haze drifting from it. What's that? Usopp asked nervously. His poison hook, Robin answered softly. Poison, Usopp cried. You're a pirate, Straw Hat. Crocodile declared, and Luffy's eyes widened a little in confusion when he saw that. You certainly proven that with your determination to defeat me no matter the cost. He stood back up. And I'll admit that you've become an annoying persistent opponent during our 3 encounters. And it's here that Crocodile finally loses whatever's left of his temper, Robin said. She had seen Crocodile angry over the 4 years that she worked with him, but this was the first time even she had seen him pushed to his limit. Luffy stared at the hook before he asked, alright. What's that? A poisonous hook, Crocodile stated as he held up his weapon and let the golden hook covering fall. I see, Luffy said simply, and clearly not caring. You seem to be a confident pirate, I suppose, so surely you must understand, Crocodile said, frowning heavily. That a duel between pirates is always about 2 people fighting for survival. And when that's the case, there's no such thing as playing dirty. As much as I hate to agree with him, he's right about that much, Sanji growled, growing more worried by the second. Luffy turned into a battle position just as a giant boulder blocked their way out behind them. There was no chance of escaping now. When the explosion happens in the square, this place will most likely crumble to dust. Crocodile informed him. This will be our final battle. Let's settle this once and for all. Well, it was, Robin agreed. Yeah, and Luffy kicked his ass here. Usopp called out as Chopper agreed firmly. He may have almost died twice doing it, but he got there in the end. And so it began, the two were at each other's throats, no longer caring what happened to themselves, focusing only on beating the other. Luffy was able to keep up with Crocodile at first despite his injuries. But over time he slowed down greatly, and they watched as the poison hook was able to pierce his skin several times. For some of them, they didn't think that it was that serious since Luffy was able to keep going, but they soon realized that the poison that was so powerful that when Crocodile slapped it into the rock, missing Luffy by inches, the rock began to melt and bubble as if someone spilled acid all over it. Chopper, Nami, Usopp, and Brook all screamed at that as the others stared. And this was before Luffy was immune to poison too, Sanji whispered, his cigarette dropping from his mouth. This is bad. That kind of poison can kill in minutes. Chopper cried in fear. As he spoke, the memory around them turned hazy and unclear, clearly it was already working as a slight ringing sound could be heard. However, Luffy kept going, even with the tomb collapsing around them, the two dealing each other powerful blows, but neither one would stay down. They don't have much time. Frankie yelled, staring up at the room, the beams holding them up were cracking and starting to crumble. In just a few minutes this whole place will cave in on them. Luffy, hurry up, Usopp called, sounding close to losing his mind here. You were skewered, buried alive and dried up, Crocodile cried out. You many have made it through all that, but you won't escape this time, Straw Hat. He then smirked as he held up his hook which hissed poison. There's no hope for survival. The game is up. This poison will spread through you soon. Why don't you fight on your own without resorting to such a dirty trick? Zoro called, shaking his head at the idea of using poison on an enemy. It was a coward's tactic if you asked him. You know, Crocodile, Luffy said, holding up his fists. You just don't understand. Crocodile blinked at that before his expression was contorted with anger. What is it that you're saying? He demanded, sounding angrier than ever. What is it that you think I do not understand, Straw Hat? Everything, Nami whispered softly. He spent so much time with his schemes and plans of war he forgot all about what being human was about. Luffy didn't answer as he charged once again. But even as he threw a punch, again Crocodile dodged it, but he wasn't stopping. Again and again, he attacked, but Crocodile was too quick and they were all feeling like they were going to lose their minds from just watching. Luffy then tried to use his Gatling gun technique, however his moves had become so sluggish that it was easy for Crocodile to avoid each one. This isn't good. Chopper cried out in fear as the memory around grew even foggier. All this jumping around is making his blood pump faster and it's spreading up the spread of the poison. I don't think you understand, Crocodile declared. You're going to die here very soon. The poison from my hook has entered your wound. Would he stop going on about that stupid poison? Frankie yelled out furiously, Luffy stumbling around, looking barely able to stand up. Your body is probably becoming numb right now, Crocodile asked almost like a taunt. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose this fight, your body will still be buried underneath the rubble when this tomb collapses. Luffy-san, you have to get up. Brook called fearfully as Luffy fell to his knees, struggling to breathe and unable to get back to his feet. Whatever it is you really want can't be in this country, Crocodile said as he stared down at Luffy, looking completely deranged. Aren't I right? You're fighting for somebody else's goal now. And how can there be any point in dying for that? If only you would just get rid of a friend or two, you could easily avoid so many of these inconvenient problems. Loyalty is only for idiots and weaklings. I'll show you idiot and weak. Sanji roared, looking ready to attach himself, but Frankie and Usopp were forced to restrain him. And this is why you don't understand anything. Brook called out venomously. Like I said, you really don't understand anything, do you? Luffy growled as his glared at Crocodile through sick and bloodshot eyes as he still struggled to get back to his feet. Vivi is always telling people not to risk their lives, but she's the first to lay down her life to save others. If we don't help her, she'll die. You'll kill her. He's right about that, Usopp said. She needs someone there to keep her out of trouble. You still don't get it. Crocodile yelled in frustration, that's what makes her such a burden. So why not ditch the princess and save yourself? How could we live with ourselves for abandoning a beautiful lady in trouble? Sanji cried out in outrage. Luffy looked up, his face now full of rage as he cried out as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, because none of us want Vivi to die. Helping each other is what friends do. Behind him, Cobra was staring at him in amazement as Luffy was finally able to push himself back up to his feet. And that's why none of us will leave her behind or quit fighting you. As long as she doesn't give up on her country, neither will we. You tell him, Luffy. Usopp cheered. We're all behind you. Chopper called loudly as Frankie posed once again and added, we wouldn't be super if we ran away now, would we? Crocodile just looked at him, his face not showing any emotion as he asked, even if that means all of rest of you end up dead. Well, we all gotta go someday. Brook said causally. And what better way to go than by going out helping a friend? Well said, Frankie added. If we die then we die, Luffy told him fiercely. That's all there is to it. Just then, Luffy's legs gave out again, and he fell back to the floor. There was a slight pause before Crocodile began to chuckle to himself, as if he couldn't remember ever hearing anything so stupid in his life. You can talk as tough all that you want and keep blubbering on about friendship if you like, but your body is still freezing up on you. Crocodile said, suddenly confident once again. You look pathetic, Straw Hat Luffy. Oh, shut up, Usopp yelled, hating hearing this guy insult his captain in such a way. As Luffy tried in vain to push himself back up, the memory around them so foggy that it was getting impossible to make out anything, Crocodile then taunted Cobra about the bomb. A time bomb, Cobra cried in panic. No, I've been very well prepared, Cobra, he said silkily. You have to be willing to admit that much, surely. He then bragged about how he had it all planned out. Even if the others had been able to find the bomb and took out the two agents who were going to fire it, he had it set up so that it would still go off after a certain length of time. This guy is hopelessly evil, Brook whispered. What had these people done to him to deserve such treatment? But before he could go on, the ground was shaking worse than ever, as if there were a crowd of giants walking around above them, which could only mean one thing. The bomb went off. Frankie yelled as Cobra leaned back, gritting his teeth and seemed to be fighting the urge to cry here. The building was falling apart faster than ever. It was Pell, Nami whispered, her eyes overshadowed as she thought of the brave Solider. We were able to find the bomb and cut the fuse, but that was when we found out that it was set to go off on its own anyway. But at the last few seconds, Pell took the bomb and took it high in the air where it went off. You mean he? Brook called in shock as they all nodded sadly as he felt his own heart sink, if he still had one. Not quite, Robin answered, and they looked to her as she answered, he survived. What? They yelled as they looked to her. How do you know? Usopp yelled, do you know how big that explosion was? No one could have survived it. Over the last 2 years I decided to look into Alabasta to see how it was doing since the war, she went on. And I discovered that though he was severely injured, he did live. They all gaped at her, unable to think of anything to say to that as Crocodile laughed out triumphantly. At last, my time has finally arrived. The day my grand ambition is realized. Alabasta now belongs to me. He should have saved the victory speech, Zoro said, coming out of the shocking news. I guess he was so happy at the thought of the bomb going off that he didn't even realize that this whole place should have caved in as well, Robin answered as Luffy finally stood up again. His body was shaking, but he glared fiercely as a fire seemed to be burning inside him. The memory around them seemed to clear as he faced Crocodile once again, and this they knew was going to be it. He better do it here because I don't think he can get back up again. Sanji said. Get him, Luffy. Usopp screamed as Crocodile glanced behind him and seemed to be completely stunned at seeing him up when he thought he was down for the count. Cobra was also staring at him in shock as the ceiling above them was now cracking apart and falling in large chunks. You can't, Luffy gasped out and Crocodile's eyes widened, defeat me. Luffy finished as he stood tall. Crocodile glared at him before he gave a wild grin. You finally managed to speak and that's all you can come up with. He headed back to him as he said, I suppose it's an acceptable bluff from a loser who's about to die. Of course, like any bluff, it's empty air. But Luffy was far from bluffing as he declared loudly without a shred of hesitation, except, I'm the man, who'll be king of the pirates. You tell him, Luffy-san. Brook cheered as Crocodile grinned even wider. Listen up, you damn brat, if you really knew anything about this sea, you wouldn't make such an idiotic statement. He said held up his hook, I told you before. There are thousands of rookies just like you. Every one of them chasing their naive little dreams. And suddenly, it was as if he snapped as he ran ahead, his hook held high as he screamed out wildly, the sooner you understand the true level of the Grand Line, the sooner you'll give up on your foolish dreams. But Luffy not only dodged the hook, he brought his foot down onto his arm and slammed the hook down so hard that it snapped right off as if it was glass. He broke it, Nami called happily. But he's still poisoned. Usopp reminded her fretfully as Crocodile gasped at what just happened. I'm the one, who's gonna beat you. Luffy hissed so dangerously that they were all taken aback by such a tone. But Crocodile didn't have time to register that for Luffy stretched his arm back and slammed it so hard into Crocodile's stomach that blood erupted from his mouth. But Luffy didn't let up as he used his foot to kick him hard in the head, sending him flying once again before he pummeled him right into the cracking floor. It had suddenly turned into a beatdown and they were all cheering him on as Robin watched with a smile, glad to see this once again. Luffy then grabbed him by the front of his shirt and pulled him around, swinging him like a lasso and slamming him into the wall behind him. Now it was Crocodile who was finding it impossible to stand up. Through the rubble, he stared back at Luffy, looking completely lost to what was going on. Even with all that poison he's taking him out. Chopper called in complete awe. You said it. Frankie cheered, he's like a freaking machine. It's because he knows that he has to win here, Robin said, because if he loses, there's no coming back. So he's putting it all on the line, including his life. Why doesn't Crocodile start using his powers though? Brook asked, dry him up or something again. Because he's getting tired too, Robin answered softly. There is also a chance that he's so angry that he's not thinking straight. Right now they are both on pure offense, they gave up strategy long ago, now it's simply a matter of who is the strongest, who can endure the most pain before there is a victory. If he had been thinking straight, then maybe he would have tried drying him up again, but they didn't need her to finish. Because they all knew that when Luffy got back up to fight, he just seemed to frighten his opponents. And it's because of that they seemed to let their guard down. Luffy was looking back, his face now deadly, there was no trace of the captain that they knew in those cold eyes. Robin could see that Crocodile was now getting desperate as he caused the blade of a dagger to come up from where the hook was broken off. It was as if he snapped and he was back up, refusing to let his plan of 3 years be ruined by a single pirate. You're just a two-bit nobody who comes from who knows where. Crocodile screamed in rage as he charged now trying to lob off his head, you can't beat me. Do you have any idea who I am? Oh he knows, he just doesn't care. Sanji grinned as Luffy ducked and the blade swinging over his head. I don't care who you are cause it doesn't matter. Luffy declared as Crocodile's eyes widened when he realized that he left himself wide open. Luffy looked up and then he screamed at the top of his lungs, whoever you are I will beat you. And with those words, he finally kicked him so hard that he was sent flying up into the air, but before he hit the ceiling, Crocodile pulled himself back together as he hovered there, seemingly effortlessly as he stated that he was going to destroy him along with the tomb. He raised his hand and gathered a swirling mass of extremely dense sand in his hand, before he hurled it at Luffy, causing a massive shockwave when it hit the ground. Everything near them was reduced to dust, but Luffy was able to move out of the path of destruction as the tomb was crumbling. Robin! Sanji screamed as memory Robin still lay there, blood seeping around her, but was now in danger of falling debris. Luffy seemed to realize this as well, for he jumped over and grabbed her roughly just as a boulder came falling down, narrowly missing them both. He set her aside against some random wall and turned to look back up at Crocodile as they sighed in relief. Opening his mouth, Luffy inhaled so much air that he blew himself up like a great balloon. They had no idea what he was planning, but he then began twisting himself around tightly. After twisting several times he lowered his face to the floor and let out all the air inside him so that he was sent flying right up towards Crocodile, like how a balloon would when you let the end go, while untwisting himself as he was sent spinning upwards. Like a rocket he shot towards Crocodile, pulling his fist back he began, gum-gum mm. Just as Crocodile held up his own fist, Desert Storm, Luffy screamed, throwing a punch. La Spada. Crocodile screamed as he formed several solid blades with fan-shaped edges from sand, flying down towards them. Luffy. Usopp screamed in fear. It was all or nothing here. Luffy's fist collided with Crocodile's attack, and the force behind him was so great, that he shattered the axes right back into sand, and like his Gatling gun move, he began to pummel Crocodile with what looked like hundreds of punches at once. Luffy didn't seem to care where they hit or even if they hit at all, but he was going to keep going no matter what happened. Crashing right into the ceiling, Crocodile was held there as Luffy kept going, hitting every part of Crocodile that he could. It was merciless, and the force from his attacks was breaking right through, sending Crocodile up and through the stone. Though it was only a matter of seconds, the attack seemed to go on forever as the roof above them cracked. But finally, he broke through. Like a volcano erupting, Crocodile was forced right up through the rock, and into the air, leaving a trail of sand behind him as bright sunlight came pouring through the hole. He did it. Chopper screamed out, his eyes bright as Luffy punched the air in victory. Amazing, croaked a voice, and they had almost forgotten about Cobra, who was now gapping up at the hole, looking like how they all felt. He punched him straight up through the bedrock beneath the city. Right up through the bedrock. Brook cried, unbelievable, I can't even see him anymore. Sanji yelled, beaming as he stared through the hole. He really did it, Nami whispered. I mean, I knew that he did, but to see it firsthand. Especially after those injuries. It's like the saying goes, Robin smiled. They can break your skin so long as you break their bones. Now completely out of energy, Luffy fell back to the ground, landing so hard that he cracked the floor underneath him, and Chopper cried out in worry as he tried to make his way over to him to see if he was alright. He was barely breathing and his body seemed to be going back into shock. This is bad, Chopper called as they gathered around him. He needs an antidote to this poison. Hey, Cobra cried, pushing himself up and slowly crawling over to Luffy's wounded body and knelt beside him. Are you alright? Does he look alright to you? Frankie yelled, but as he looked to the bright light above him he whispered, I thank you. He no longer looked afraid or sad, his face oddly peaceful, and they realized that here he no longer cared what happened to him. Even if he died here, he could die happily knowing that the real threat was gone. Despite how badly hurt he was, Luffy was grinning at him. No sweat. He doesn't even realize that he's talking to the king here, does he? Brook asked. I doubt it. Nami laughed a little as the memory now became fuzzy and shifted out of focus. But then they heard a light clack on the floor and they looked to see that memory. Robin had pulled out a small red bottle from her coat and rolled it over to Cobra. Use that, immediately, she told him as he looked down at it. When he didn't take it at once, she clarified, it can neutralize the poison from Crocodile's hook. Cobra gave her a suspicious look as she went on, even if he was buried underneath all this rubble, there's a chance he might survive since he's actually rubber. Still looking like he wasn't sure he could trust her, he took the bottle and uncorked it. So you had the antidote? Chopper asked, that's good to know. I knew about the poison in that hook, and I decided to keep a bottle with me should he try to kill me with it, Robin answered. Besides, he took Crocodile down and saved her back here, she figured that it was the least she could do. She had already given up on her life by that point and she no longer needed it. She wanted nothing more than to die than in this place. But Cobra was looking back at Robin, and said, you looked me straight in the eye and told me the only thing written here was history. Why did you lie to me? You lied. About what? Nami asked her. Robin didn't answer as she watched on. Blood was dripping from both sides of her mouth as her past self looked away, looking sad. You knew? She asked grimly. How cruel. The truth is, this country's history isn't written anywhere in there, Cobra explained, though it was clear from his tone that he already knew that she knew that. Instead, it has everything about the weapon you wanted to get your hands on. The description, location, it doesn't make any sense. So you know where this ancient weapon is and how to use it. Usopp gulped. That's right, Robin answered, it's why the government has hunted me all this time. And also why they wanted me captured alive. They wanted me to help them awaken those weapons and put an end to the age of pirates. Please don't tell me, Brook begged. I rather not know. Cobra lifted Luffy's head and gently poured the cure into his open mouth. At once the memory around them seemed to clear and his breathing let up, though his face was now red from a growing fever. If you had told Crocodile this information, this country would now be his for the taking. Isn't that right? Memory. Robin looked exhausted as she leaned back against a wall. I'm not interested, she confessed and shut her eyes. Whether people in this country live or die, it really makes no difference to me. I had already decided from the start not to give Crocodile the weapon. That's cold, Robin, Usopp whispered. Maybe, Sanji said, but everything you did to survive. And in the end, you chose not to give something so dangerous to a power-hungry maniac like Crocodile, and that's all that matters. Thanks, Sanji, she smiled a little and he swooned in happiness. My dear, he cried, I meant every word. I'll do anything to see that smile of yours. I don't understand, Cobra said as he placed Luffy back on the stone floor and kept looking at her with curiosity. Then why did you come here? There was a tense pause as the walls buckled around them. I don't even know anymore, she confessed as she opened her eyes. Chasing a dream, I suppose, an empty dream. The last remaining poneglyph in the world that still carries the true history. The Rio poneglyph. What do you mean by the true history? Cobra questioned, not understanding it. Nothing, Memory Robin sighed, looking as if she no longer cared. It doesn't matter now. For 20 years of search and I've never had a better lead than this. This is my last hope, and it didn't work out. The final beams that were holding the ceiling up buckled, they had perhaps less than a minute left before it finally crumbled. So if I'm going to die here, it's the perfect time. I'm tired of this fool's crusade. It's over. Robin-san. Brooke whispered, you mean, you wanted to. At this point in my life I was tired of fighting, she answered sadly. I wanted nothing more than to die here. Robin. Chopper sniffled a little and she smiled at him. But that was back then, she answered. A large boulder fell and smoke filled the room, but when it cleared, they could see a smile on Memory Robin's face, but it wasn't a happy smile. All I wanted was to learn our true history. Tears appeared and slowly began to fall from her face, and to share it with the whole world. The Straw Hats were unable to believe how broken that she sounded here. She had gone through so much all on her own for years, suffered because of the world government, and was ready to give up everything here. It almost didn't sound like the Robin they knew. I thought that Luffy was out cold here, current Robin sighed. I guess I was wrong if he remembered this. But as she thought about it, could it be because he heard it all that he saved her? So then, you're saying, that it's possible that our lost history can be recovered? Cobra said, his eyes wide. And the poneglyph are the key to unlocking these records. Robin said nothing, but kept that same grim smile and Cobra stared at her. You mean, all this time? But neither one said anything else on the matter because Luffy had gotten back to his feet. Though he was covered in blood, sweat, and dirt, his face now showing clear signs of a high fever, he was standing upright. He picked up Cobra under his arm like how he carried Sanji back at Drum, before he went to Robin and threw her over his shoulder. "'Kay, let's go," Luffy declared, looking up to the hole he made in the ceiling, knowing that it was now their only way out. "So he saved you here?" Chopper asked in relief, though he heard about it, he was nice to see it confirmed. Memory Robin however, didn't seem to agree. "Hold on," she cried, now sounding angry, looking like she wanted to fight, but no longer had the energy to do so. "I no longer have a reason to live, just leave me here." "You've got rocks in your head if you honestly thought he was going to leave you down there," Nami said. "Normally, I'm on the ladies' side," Sanji said firmly, "but this time I have to agree with Luffy here. I'd never forgive him if he left a beautiful woman to die in a place like this." Luffy hardly glanced at her before he looked back to the hole. "You're coming with me, do what you want once we're out of here." Memory Robin just stared at him, unable to believe what he was doing. He didn't owe her anything, was second in command to Crocodile, but here he was, saving her. She seemed to lose all will to move as she allowed him to do what he wanted. Current Robin smiled. "I'm glad that he didn't listen to me." Using up whatever strength he had left, he was able to jump up the falling stones just as it caved in, burying everything below them. He managed to get up and through the exit, but instead of the bright sunlight they expected, there were thick storm clouds and heavy rain. "Rain," Frankie called in surprise. "You mean after Crocodile lost the rain came back?" Brooke called out in amazement. "How? I've wondered that as well," Robin answered as Luffy landed safely on the ground and dropped Cobra and Robin. He skidded a little and fell, landing on his face and no longer able to move. "The rain," Cobra gasped as he looked up at the sky. "It's come back. And thank goodness too," Nami sighed in relief. Even after the bomb went off, the rebels and the royals were still going at it. I think that it would have gone on until they all killed each other, but when it began to rain, they were all so stunned that they stopped and gave Vivi enough time to be able to scream at them to stop. "It truly is over now," Zoro said as Cobra was actually began to cry as he held his shaking hands out to catch the cold rain. It was clear that he truly thought that he was going to die in that tomb, but not only was he alive, but the war was over now. Luffy smiled a little before the memory faded at once, leaving the Straw Hats back in the dark field. But they didn't care, they were all talking about what they saw. Usopp wasn't holding back his admiration, he really came through here. It was a long time in coming, but he actually did it. Knocked him right through that rock like that. That was beyond awesome. But still, Crocodile was far from weak, Nami said. Luffy was in really bad shape by the time we found him. And his fever was almost as bad as mine was. Vivi and Chopper spent the next 3 days taking care of him and we were all worried sick. "I'm going to have a word with Luffy about that," Chopper whispered angrily. "If I didn't know better, I'd think he was trying to kill himself." The next memory came up after that. They were in a large room that was filled with several beds with most of the Straw Hats and Vivi. Luffy was sitting up in a large and was laughing out loud. "Oh man, I slept good," he cried out, clearly feeling good. Brook was truly glad to see that he had recovered so well after his ordeal. But when Luffy put his hand on his head he realized that his hat was missing and began looking around for it in his breakfast. "You just woke up and you're already causing a racket," Memory Sanji said, leaning back in a chair as he watched. "And it won't be breakfast, it'll be dinner." It's evening. Standing next to him was Usopp, who then pointed to a table, letting Luffy know that a soldier found it in front of the palace. Luffy stretched out to grab it and looked happily at it before he put it on his head. We never would have heard the end of that if we never found the hat, Zoro stated. I'm so relieved you finally got well, Luffy, Vivi said in relief. He looked at her in surprise. Got well? What do you mean? I was never not well. Well, he wouldn't know since he was sleeping the whole time, Nami whispered as her past self spoke up from one of the other beds as she stacked some books up, telling him how bad a shape he was in and how he could thank Vivi and Chopper for taking care of him. Really? Luffy said, looking from Chopper to Vivi. Thanks you guys. Just then, the door opened and Zoro came in, also looking almost completely healed from his fight with Mr. 1. Oh, Luffy, he said, pleasantly surprised. You woke up. Luffy held up a hand in greeting. Zoro, long time no see, but then he blinked at his words. Wait a minute. As he thought his words over, Memory Zoro was getting a drink of water as Chopper yelled at him about him going out to train. And soon it was the same old fight. Chopper yelled at him about taking his bandages off and Zoro complained how impossible it was to move with them on, and Chopper would scream that was the whole point. Would you lighten up? Current Zoro asked as Chopper glared at him. That is a bad habit of yours, Zoro. He yelled, even if you felt alright, do you know how easy it would be for your wounds to reopen? Long time no see, Luffy's voice said, moving his head side to side. Why'd I say that? Probably because it has been long, Memory Usopp said from the couch near the door. You've been asleep for 3 entire days. 3 days. 3 whole days. Luffy cried out, he thought it over for a moment. I missed 15 meals. And I didn't think that he could do math till now, Sanji said sarcastically as Memory Nami snapped that he sure could calculate when it came to food. By his count that's like 5 meals a day. Past Usopp laughed as a door opened and a familiar figure came in, bearing a whole cart of food. Oh, Brook said happily. That Mr. 8 character really did survive. That's good to see. Actually, Nami laughed, that's Terracotta, Agaram's wife. Wait, his wife. Frankie yelled as Luffy was able to swallow all the food in the cart faster than blinking and Zoro and Sanji began yelling at him for that. There is only so much that couples should look alike. Current Usopp nodded, remember the shock when he first saw this lady. Boy, if you blinked, you missed it, Frankie said, staring at the food that disappeared like magic. Well, we'll let that go now that we saw what he went through here, Nami said and the memory faded quickly around them. We all slept for at least a full day before most of us got up. Zoro I think slept for 2 days. Give or take, Zoro admitted. After that we had this great feast, Usopp sighed patting his belly at the thought of it all fondly. Took long, hot baths, and said farewell to this kingdom of the sand. His words were proven when they were back in the same room, only now there was darkness behind the windows, revealing night. Vivi and all the Straw Hats were there and seemed to be discussing what they were supposed to do now. Tonight, past Usopp asked in surprise. Yep, Memory Nami nodded firmly. We have to leave, Chopper asked, sounding disappointed. The Marines know we're here, past Zoro said. More will be coming. I agree with Nami. We need to get out. You all better leave while the going was good, Frankie agreed as he thought it out, with everyone in the past slowly agreeing as well, with Luffy saying that they should stay for a little more food. Isn't he full yet? Nami sighed, remembering the trays of food that he inhaled back in the dining hall. Their past selves gave him a quick bonk on the head and he nodded at once just as there was a knock on the door and a guard came in. He was holding a transponder snail on a tray and telling them all that they had a call. From who? Memory Nami asked in surprise. It could have been dangerous, Robin told them. The Marines could have used this as a chance to figure out your location and gotten the entire royal family in danger. Didn't think about that till it was too late, Sanji said in embarrassment. Who is it anyway? Brook asked as the guard answered that he called himself Bon. Bon, as in Bon Clay, Frankie asked in surprise. Turns out that guy was able to escape being caught by the Marines, Sanji answered. Really not surprising given his abilities, Robin reminded him. It wouldn't have been difficult at all for him to slip out disguised as an Alabasta citizen, or guard. When you put it like that, I guess we should have known, Zoro said as their past selves didn't seem to know who he was talking about. That's strange, the guard said, he insists that you're all good friends. Sanji got up. Friends with us, he repeated before he picked up the receiver and heard that familiar voice on the other end. Hello, hey old friends, it's me, he cackled, bet you never thought you'd hear from me again. With a frozen look on his face, past Sanji hung up. But the phone just rang, loudly again. That's one way to send a greeting, Usopp whispered. You freak. Memory Sanji yelled at the snail phone, shut up. But Luffy stretched out to grab it so that he could talk to him. So you escaped Mr. 2. What do you want? He asked. Straw Hat. Bon Clay's voice said. I'd recognize that voice anywhere. You're right, I escaped, and I intend to keep it that way. So don't call me Mr. 2. If the Marines intercept this call they'll be able to ascertain the locations of both me and you. Thanks a lot you jerk. Past Chopper yelled. What an idiot, Sanji hissed, rubbing his head at that. Tell us what you want. Past Zoro yelled. Oh, it's not what I want, it's what I have. Bon Clay answered. Your ship. He's kidding, right? Frankie asked, knowing that he was in for an ass-kicking just for saying that. And he was right. Stop joking. Everyone but Vivi screamed out. I'm going to kick your butt for saying that. Memory Usopp yelled threateningly. Where are you? On your ship, the Going Merry. He answered a little mockingly. I should have kicked him harder. Memory Sanji yelled, holding up a fist. For someone who claims to be a friend, he sure isn't making friends here, Brook whispered. Maybe, but it's actually a good thing that he took the ship, Nami answered. After all, if it was left where it was, the Marines would have taken it and then we'd be stuck here. Hey, calm down, Bon Clay said. Please, I mean, we are friends, right? Right. And he hung up not long after that after he told them where they could find him and left with a long laugh. The memory versions of them were all looking at each other, wondering what to do. He's at the upper part of the Sandora River, Luffy finished speaking as Sanji asked if they could trust him. We did become friends that one time, Luffy answered back, but that was before we knew that he was part of Baroque Works. Past Zoro said loudly. I guess, Chopper said slowly, we have no choice. There really wasn't anything else that could be done, Usopp sighed, he had our ship so we had to go and get it back. You're right, Memory Sanji agreed with him, he has our ship. If he tries to trick us, I'll be more than happy to kick the crap out of him again. Once that was decided, they were all got up and began packing up their things, getting ready to sneak away into the night. They were so busy with thoughts about getting their ship back, they didn't even realize that Vivi hadn't said a word as she watched them. Hey, you guys, she asked softly and they all looked to her. She looked to be shaking as she confessed that she didn't know what to do now. What does she mean? Brook asked. She wanted to come with us, but was torn between that and her desire to stay here, Nami said. What? Frankie gasped. You mean she was willing to leave behind being a princess to run out to sea with a bunch of pirates? We all became really good friends, but Nami said softly as their past selves all glanced at each other for a moment before they sighed. No one said a word again until they finished packing and were heading to the window to leave. Vivi, past Nami said to her, looking over a map. We can give you 12 hours to make a decision. We'll travel down to Sandora, after teaching Ballerina Boy why he shouldn't steal from us, and by noon tomorrow we'll draw near the eastern harbor. She looked back up to her with a smile. I doubt we'll be able to drop anchor though. If you do decide to join us, that's going to be your only time to come aboard. 12 o'clock, on the dot. Everyone was smiling at her, letting her know that no matter what she chose, it was alright by them. It's your choice. You can stay a princess, or you can become a pirate. I'm sure that being a pirate doesn't compare to being a princess, past Sanji added, leaning on the windowsill as they began slipping out, but we'd sure love to have you. Luffy was all for the idea and telling her that she should come with them right now, and Usopp was telling him off as he shoved him to their exit. Why? Luffy asked confused as Zoro practically threw him out. Don't you guys want her to join us? We do, past Usopp said firmly, but that's something she has to decide herself. As much as I would have loved to have seen her go with you, I don't think she's cut out for this sort of life, Brook said softly as the memory faded. I suppose, Nami decided. But we really would have loved for her to come. However, I agree that it was for the best. She shouldn't have had to give up everything for us. Alabasta needed her more than we did. And she had to stay to keep the country from falling apart. Wait, Chopper suddenly asked her, where were you, Robin? After Luffy got you out of that creepy tomb. You disappeared. Robin didn't answer for a moment but she confessed, I was stuck wandering the desert on my own. I knew that I'd be sent to prison if I hung around. In all the confusion, it wasn't too difficult. After a couple days and my wound healed enough I ended up stumbling across Bon Clay and the Mary. She remembered that dark night when she was lost and alone. It was the second time she had been saved by a man with the name of D. She didn't know how she was able to get as far as she did in her condition, but she eventually found her way to the ship. As soon as she saw it, she could almost hear Saul's laughing voice in her head, encouraging her to live. She didn't have anything else to lose and nowhere to go at this point. So she stumbled on board and went to rest below deck. Wait, you were with Bon Clay? Chopper chirped in surprise. I always did like him, Robin admitted, he made me laugh. He took pity on me and let me on board once I told him that I no longer had any reason to want to hurt you. He was in the same position as I was, and we were only thinking about leaving Alabasta. But we couldn't do it on our own. I stayed below deck until I was sure that we were far away from land, and the Marines had stopped chasing us before I felt it was safe to come up top. Because you knew that we'd have no choice but let you stay. Nami asked knowingly. Robin chuckled a little. Something like that I suppose. And I'm so glad that you did, Robin-chan. Sanji sighed happily. You helped to complete an empty void inside me the day we met and when you joined, it was as if an angel was sent from heaven itself. Idiot, Zoro stated. Care to repeat that? Sanji threatened as the memory returned and they were standing on the edge of the river with the Mary in front of them, and a familiar face standing on the crow's nest. The Straw Hats had been riding a flock of ducks that were just as big, if not bigger than even Karu. Karu's friends. Brook asked happily. The supersonic duck squad, Nami laughed. They gave us all a ride. Boy were those ducks fast, Usopp said. Finally. Long time no see my friends. Bon Clay cried happily from his place up there. Did you guys miss little, old me? Not a bit. Past Zoro called back as they all turned back to wave to the ducks, bidding them farewell. Even Bon Clay waved them off, but then it turned to a fight between him and Sanji, with him arguing about learning some manners on how to greet his friends. Quit saying that, you weirdo, Luffy said as they began loading the ship. We're not friends, we're enemies. You lied to us. No, I didn't. Bon Clay yelled. I just didn't admit that I was a member of Baroque Works. You gotta admit, he's got a good point, Frankie pointed out. He didn't know that you were the enemy. Bon Clay sat on the railing with a sigh and went on, besides, none of that really matters anymore, does it? Baroque Works is done for now, and that means we're no longer enemies. Well, if we're not enemies, ballerina guy, then why the heck did you steal our ship? Luffy demanded as Zoro snapped for Bon Clay to move out of the way so that he could get on the ship. Oh, how dumb are you? Bon Clay yelled. Very dumb, but that is a good question in retrospect, Sanji admitted as Bon Clay asked that if he hadn't taken the ship from where it was moored, what did they think would have happened to it? The Marines probably would have seized it. Nami answered as she knelt over one of the bags and Luffy gaped at her. Chance that probably to a definitely, honey. Bon Clay yelled. The Marines have been looking all over for you guys and your ship. Every port in the country has been blockaded. Lockdown. Wait, Luffy yelled, or you tell me that you took the Going Merry so that the Marines wouldn't. Usopp and Chopper were with him and both demanded the same thing, and when Bon Clay answered, he merely gave them the thumbs up and said, "'Cause you guys are my friends." So touching. Even after all this, he sees you as friends. Brook laughed happily, liking Bon Clay more with every second. You know, I just noticed that we do have a tendency for former enemies to become allies in the end, Nami said in an impressed tone. Luffy's really good at that, Zoro said folding his arms, and he doesn't even realize it. He may be weird, but he's loyal, Robin admitted as Bon Clay, Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper were dancing and singing together once again. Oh my friends. Bon Clay yelled. We might have had to fight on opposite sides of a war, but our friendship will survive for an eternity. Friends? Zoro asked in annoyance as they finished loading the ship. Yeah right. Tell the truth, Twinkle Toes. You and your crew don't have a chance of breaking through that blockade, but you might if you had us as allies. Blunt, but hey, we all need help once in a while, Usopp admitted as Bon Clay stopped in mid-dance and the three looked to him in shock. That's right, Bon Clay said dramatically, crying, you got me, but in trying times such as these we have to band together under the flag of friendship. If you believe in true friendship, say I. The three yelled with him. Other voices cried out and Bon Clay's crew and ship seemed to appear out of nowhere. Frankie was laughing out loud at that as Zoro screamed at the other ship where they came from. I love these guys. They sure know how to lighten up the mood. The next memory came soon after that and they were all standing on the Mary's deck. The ship was being shot at by giant black harpoons, at least 8 ships giving chase. Man, they sure pulled out the stops here, didn't they? Zoro asked. Looks like they're finally seeing the crew as a threat, Nami said, shaking her head. You and Luffy both got bounties here. Your bounty was 60 million, and Luffy's had gone up more than 3 times. 100 million. Incredible. Brook said in awe. Such bounties were rare in his day, but to receive them on your first or second time was truly impressive. Damn it, shoot cannonballs. Luffy yelled at them in frustration. I can't deflect pointy things. I think that's the point here, Luffy. Sanji called as the harpoons pierced through the hull of the ship and they could hear Usopp and Chopper below, trying to repair the holes. Damn, no wonder your ship was falling apart by the time you got to Water 7, Frankie said in a deadpan voice. After taking damage like this, it would take a lot more than a patch to fix her up. It's a miracle she lasted as long as she did. Memory, Sanji called up, if we keep taking iron spears to the bottom of the ship it's only going to be a matter of time before it sinks. Crap, here they come. Past Nami cried out as more spears hit their sides. Hey, I can't keep plugging these holes, you guys. Past Chopper screamed as he came up from the bottom of the ship with a mallet and several boards of wood. Your hammer skills suck, Frankie stated. We're not shipwrights. Usopp snapped as Past Nami started yelling at the others to do something. What more can we do? It take all our effort to protect one side. Memory, Sanji demanded. 1 ship versus 8 isn't a fair fight. Nice to see how far we've come, Zoro smirked. After all, I think that most of the crew can take out those battleships on our own. His past self was growling out that they'd have a better chance of hand-to-hand combat than this. Even if they ran or stayed to fight, they weren't going to break their formation. And a ship like the Mary wasn't made for battle, Frankie said. She was built for sailing. Though she's smaller and quicker than any battleship, that's not going to help when you're surrounded and being fired at. Yeah, thanks, we know that now, Usopp said in annoyance, watching in sadness as the ship was being impaled like a pincushion. You know, you should prepare the Sunny should we ever come into something like this in the future, Nami said worriedly. Aye. Frankie saluted, making a mental note of this. Once we get our rubber brain captain back, I'll make sure that's the first thing I do. The battle went on, and things seemed to be getting worse every second. But the strangest part was when they ran across two familiar faces on one of the Navy ships. Django, and Full Body. I forgot about these two losers, Sanji sighed. The Black Spear Squadron. Django exclaimed proudly. It's a work of art. On the ship next to him, Full Body was laughing confidently and stuck his tongue out at the Straw Hats. It's the Black Cage Corp specialty. Idiots. He's the last person to be calling anyone an idiot, Nami said in deep annoyance. I wish I kicked his ass harder, Sanji whispered to himself. Then he wouldn't be able to come after us and we wouldn't have to put up with him. Hey hypnotist, I thought you were a pirate. Luffy screamed at Django. I am. Now shut up. Django yelled back quickly. My reasons are my own. Don't the Marines do decent background checks anymore? Usopp asked, still angry that this jerk tried to kill Kaya. What did he do that they let him join? Well, it's easy to think like a pirate if you were one, Robin answered, so he could be more useful than we thought. Where do I know that guy from? Memory Sanji was asking thoughtfully, looking at Full Body. He wasn't worth remembering, Sanji agreed as Full Body declared loudly, it took a long time but I finally found him. That annoying crazy cook and his gang of wild cutthroats. Here, today, I vow to sink them. I guess he's still angry at you, Sanji-san, Brook stated. Damn, some people really know how to hold a grudge, Sanji said as Django took out his familiar charm, about to use his abilities. But before he did, past Usopp ran around to the cannon and shot a cannonball. It hit it in such a way that it fell apart and, not only sank, but crashed into Full Body's ship as well. Brother! Full Body yelled in distress as Django's ship slammed into his and they both sunk into the ocean. Now that was amazing bro. Frankie laughed as Luffy looked towards Usopp, who was staring completely dumbfounded the whole time. Usopp, did you do that? Luffy exclaimed in surprise. Amazing. I'll give you that, Nami agreed calmly as past Usopp looked to him, his face registering nothing but shock before he snapped out of it. Yes, just as I calculated. He called confidently, it was me. That's what happens to enemy ships when I'm on the job. Then why do you seem so surprised? Zoro asked in amusement as Chopper jumped up to Usopp's shoulder, telling him how cool that was. Rest easy, Chopper, he exclaimed, joyously. Captain Usopp will have everything under control. Really, Usopp? Chopper asked happily. Will you? That's so reassuring, Usopp. That's very responsible of you, Usopp, complimented Robin, and the poor liar couldn't felt prouder. So from now on, we should leave the entire ship's defense just to you. In case we run across even more Marines or Sea Kings. Yeah, that's okay. I wouldn't want to take all the fun from you guys. Usopp stuttered quickly. That was amazing Nose-chan. Bon Clay also cheered. The ships in the south are all sunk. Nothing can stop us from breaking through. Bon Clay, we've got trouble. One of his men suddenly called from his ship. When Bon Clay turned to ask what the problem was, they yelled out that it was the Black Cage. Black Cage Hina? Robin asked mildly as Bon Clay's face was turned to terror. Who's that? Brook asked just as Luffy asked that same thing. Black Cage Hina. She's a marine captain and we're in her jurisdiction. Bon Clay exclaimed in fear. She's a real pain. We have to hurry up and fly the coop. She is merciless, Robin answered. She patrols these waters and she has the powers of the cage fruit. I guess it's appropriate for a marine. Cage, Nami repeated in confusion as Robin went on. This ability allows her to bind her enemies in iron shackles that she can create, Robin explained. She is dangerous. And if she's a captain, she's at least as strong as Smoker, Chopper added nervously as Bon Clay's men all cheered on the idea of escaping. But the Straw Hats didn't move at all, even with Bon Clay yelling at them to do so as Hina's ship was drawing nearer. If you want to go, Luffy said to him. We can't go that way. And exactly why not? Bon Clay screamed in frustration as his own crew screamed that they should just go. Noon at the Eastern Harbor. Past Nami answered. We have an appointment. There's no time to go around, we'll go straight through. Wow, you were willing to risk it all just for a chance to get to Vivi. Frankie said impressed. Thinking back, it was probably better for us to leave here, but we at least wanted to go and see if she was there, even if that chance was slim, Usopp answered and Chopper nodded. What? Suicide? Bon Clay yelled angrily, looking ready to leave anyway. It's ludicrous. Is there some treasure you're not telling me off that's worth throwing away your lives? He turned his back on them as he jumped to his ship. Fine. Run off and die. We have to go get one of our friends, Luffy answered and Bon Clay's face was filled with nothing but shock. Whatever answer he was expecting, it wasn't that. So, it's for your pal that you risk it all? He asked softly as silence sunk in around them. He then turned to his crew and declared, we're going to fight the Marines. His entire crew screamed in surprise as Brook and Frankie gaped at him. You mean he was willing to stay and fight for that? Brook called in wonder. Though he's eccentric, Bon Clay has always valued friendship, Robin said softly. When I asked him why one time he told me that it's the Okama way. You gotta admire him for that, Usopp sniffled. I take back anything bad I ever said about him. Running now would go against everything Bon Clay stand for. The drag queen yelled to his crew. If we abandon allies who are risking their lives to pick up a friend, could we live with ourselves tomorrow? The crew all stared at him before they all cried out the same thing, ready to fight as Bon Clay yelled to the Straw Hats, tears in his eyes, listen guys. Straw Hats too. What I must say is of great importance. He took on Luffy's face and his crew took disguises of the rest of the crew before they left to distract the crew, giving time to the Straw Hats to escape. It worked perfectly though, the Marines were completely distracted as they went after them, but the battle didn't last long, and only ended with the ship going down in a blaze of glory from Haina's ship. Bon Clay, Luffy cried, all of them watching the scene with horror as the ship went down. What a brave soul, Brook called tearfully. Such courage I will dedicate a song to. I'm gonna miss you, Bon Clay. Luffy cried. Usopp, Chopper, and even Sanji were all crying next to him as they sailed away, we will never forget you. They then heard Bon Clay's voice calling out almost like an echo, if we are to fall, let it be in the sea. The flower of friendship is rejoicing. Frankie was beating the ground with his fists, sobbing his heart out. That damn pervert, how could he do something so selfless? How could someone like that have ever been an enemy? I'm almost sorry that I beat him up, Sanji sniffled a little. You don't think that he's dead do you? Chopper asked tearfully. I doubt it, Robin said bracingly. It's going to take a lot more than that to finish him off. He's strong enough to get himself out of any situation. The Merry went on east, fighting their way through the two marine ships that were blocking their way. But they managed to force their way past them and finally reached the eastern harbor like they were supposed to meet. However, Vivi wasn't anywhere to be seen. They waited for a few minutes before they heard her voice, apparently though a loudspeaker, addressing her country on what happened during her 2 years away from home. Vivi, Memory Chopper said sadly as he and Luffy leaned on the rails. She's not coming is she? Brook said sadly. Though he knew it must have been what happened, he had hoped that she would have come to say goodbye at least. Forget about it, you heard the speech, Memory Zoro snapped at the two, that was Vivi's voice without a doubt. Past Sanji was looking deeply disappointed as well as he added that they were broadcasting the ceremony from Alubarna. Vivi clearly made up her mind not to come here. No, I don't buy it. I say she's here, Luffy said stubbornly, this is the place we promised right? Yes, it is, Memory Zoro added, trying to sound patient, but also with a firm look that reminded them all of the danger they were in. Past Sanji looked around, letting them know that it was past noon. There's no way she wouldn't have come. Luffy said, sounding hurt, she's definitely here. Let's get out and look for her. There was no time, current Nami sighed as the others felt really bad at this whole thing. Memory Usopp brought them back to the matter at hand by screaming that the ships had reappeared and were coming up fast. When Zoro called how many there were, they knew that it was time to go with all 6 ships still after them. Looking like he also wanted to get out and look, Sanji told Luffy to give it up. Viv's course is on a road far different from ours. Luffy pouted, but seemed to accept it as he turned from the railing. But as he did, Vivi's voice called out behind them, but this time it wasn't from the amplifier. Everyone. They all looked and there she was, dressed just like how a princess would look, and Karu by her side. She really came. Frankie yelled in surprise, so she did come with you guys. No, Nami smiled a little, just to say goodbye. Vivi. Luffy screamed happily and everyone turned at once with smiles on their faces. Karu. Usopp yelled joyfully and the two both waved back merrily at them. Excited, the whole crew was getting ready to turn around and go back. But they had to hurry since the Marines were right behind them. But they didn't have to bother. I came to say goodbye. Vivi yelled, and the smiles were wiped off their faces in confusion. What, she say? Luffy began to ask, not understanding what was going on. Sorry, but I can't go with you. Vivi said as she spoke through the speaker once again. Thank you so much for everything. I'd like to go on more adventures, but I can't ignore the needs of my country. Which I love more than anything. I have to stay. I hope you understand. We got it, Zoro said softly. And I have to agree. Doesn't mean that we have to like it, Chopper sniffled a little. Luffy still seemed stunned, but got over it as he smiled an accepting smile. I see, he said brightly. Glad to see that he's taking it well, Sanji said. I was worried about that. Because she came to say goodbye, Nami laughed a little. And he knows that she would have liked to go on more adventures with us, and I guess the thought alone is enough. Though I think it would have been nice to have her come, at least we don't have to worry about her being in danger all the time. Besides, Alabasta still has a long way to go before it's fully recovered from the war. Someone has to make sure that things stay that way. Thank you, Vivi cried out, now starting to sob and tears were forming in her eyes. When she spoke again, she was trying to hold back the cries so hard that she was starting to stutter. I will remain here and fulfill my duty. If we ever meet again, no matter how much times pass, will you still call me your friend? Luffy didn't even have to think that over as he started shouting back to her, but Nami cut him off by covering his mouth and telling him not to answer. The Marines now know about Vivi and us. She told him, if they can prove she has a connection to us it's all over. she'll be considered a criminal. Sad to say it, but it's for her own good, Robin answered as Luffy frowned at her, but unable to think of a way to counter that argument. So, you just left without a goodbye? Frankie asked quickly. That's cold. Not cool, bro. They all turned their backs on her and Karu. Turn away, past Nami said firmly, leaving no room for argument. Not another word. They did as she told them, but they didn't leave without giving Vivi an answer. The Straw Hats here, all wordlessly took off the wrappings that they still had on their arms and held them up so that Vivi could see the X's still on their arms. The current Straw Hats smiled at the scene, even the ones who hadn't been there. Though no words were said, the message was clear. Vivi also held up her own arm with Karu, both wearing the same X mark. Whether they liked it or not, they would always be honorary Straw Hats, and no matter how much time had passed, they looked forward to the day they met again. The memory faded around them at that, the scene still playing itself in their eyes. That was so sweet. Brooke sobbed, I don't know how much more of this I can take. I don't see how it can get any more touching than that. But as some of the others began talking, wondering how Vivi was doing, Zoro's and Sanji's eyes widened and they turned with such speed and force that the wind knocked them all back a few feet. What's wrong? Usopp cried out at once, startled at their serious expressions. It's here. Sanji cried out as Zoro flicked out his blades. What's here? Nami cried, going for her own weapon. You mean that? Usopp cried out, his eyes wide, but there wasn't time to explain. There it was, hanging over the fields was that giant ball of black slime, shining almost metallically in the feeble light. About time you finally showed up. Zoro yelled in irritation. Now get over here so that we can deal with you. The black blob hung in the air for another moment before it slammed back into the ground, much like how it did before, flattening out to that pool of gunk. Everyone was ready to fight, not sure of how they were going to do so here, or even what form it was about to take on, at least until the figure began to rise out of it. The long coat over his shoulders, the stitched-up face, the large hook on his arm. You've got to be kidding me. Usopp cried out as Chopper screamed. Crocodile, Robin answered, her arms held up, ready to fight. Unlike when it looked like Arlong, this seemed to be much more stable and didn't melt when it stood before them. However, it wasn't completely solid either. Want to become a mummy? The slime crocodile asked, his slimy voice bringing back all the bad memories that they were forced to face. But as they prepared for an attack, this crocodile was looking over in another direction, his eyes landing on something else, his intention only all too clear. His one good eye widening a little, Zoro yelled out, you get away from there. And the whole crew charged forward to stand between crocodile slime and the two graves.